All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Light. And today we're going to be discussing a little bit of this book. You may have seen it with this cover, The Dark Aeon, a book written by Joe Allen. He's one of the contributors to Steve Bannon's program, The War Room. And this has been a book that's been recommended to me by a few people. And I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts about it. We're kind of reviewing a conversation Joe Allen had discussing his book and research. And there's a lot of topics I want to get into. So we have, again, a video. There's an article that I want to read to you guys. If you've been following my conversations on transhumanism, you know that my academic work is all focused around this topic. And there's a gentleman that I've mentioned multiple times by the name Max Moore. His real name's Max O'Connor, but as a transhumanist, and he's really sort of the progenitor of the philosophical dimension of transhumanism. He developed what's called extropianism. And he changed his last name to Moore, which is not uncommon, actually, in the transhumanist world, to try to create names or rename yourself that is in line with your transhumanist vision. But anyways, Max Moore is kind of the leading philosopher. He's works at the, I think he may still be the president at the Alcor Life Extension, where they do cryonic preserving of bodies, corpses, if you will. And so I have an article actually written by Max Moore titled In Praise of the Devil, and that's going to relate to some of the conversations that I want to present to you guys, because this book, The Dark Aeon, again, this is the cover. I'm notorious for taking all the covers off my books. I find them annoying when I'm doing research and when I'm going through a book. And I've been going through this one pretty extensively. And it's funny. There's a major shout out needs to go to the Eschaton Vigil. He actually is the one that really got me to read this book. And believe it or not, my parents watched The War Room, and Steve Bannon made reference to this book, The Dark Aeon. I remember my dad saying, "Oh, have you read this book for your dissertation?" And I kind of saw an outline, and I said, no, and I didn't buy it. Didn't seem like it was sort of the academic text, primary source of important insight that I thought I needed for some of my research. So I kind of brushed it off. And then more recently, the Eschaton Vigil reached out to me and asked me if I had read The Dark Aeon. And I said, no, I haven't. I've heard of it. And he said, you really need to check it out, because it really aligns with so many of the things that you talk about and are writing about for your academic work. So I said, oh, okay. And he actually got it for me. So major, again, thank you to the Eschaton Vigil. He sent me this copy. And upon actually going through it, I do have a few critiques, but it is better than I was expecting. And The Dark Aeon does hit on so many of the attributes and dimensions of my own dissertation. And actually reading it kind of broke my heart, because my whole goal was to really put forward a research project on transhumanism and its relationship to Christianity, theologically speaking, as a sort of inversion to deification. And this work doesn't necessarily do that. What it is talking about, and how it overlaps with my research, is talking about transhumanism as a sort of competing religious orientation towards self-deification through the means of technology, and a sort of ending of biological humanity, and kind of contrasting that with the Imago Dei of Christianity. That's part and parcel of my research as well. But the way it's presented is it's the first. Well, here, let me pull up the actual the the way that it's presented here. It's kind of marketed, if you will, as the first. Here's the article I want to read you guys. Very short. This is from Max Moore in Praise of the Devil. But this is the website of the publisher, Skyhorse Publishing, and it presents a description of this work as one of the groundbreaking and like the first kind of comprehensive critical analysis of transhumanism. So on their website, humanity is consumed by relentless transformation. Like a thief in the night, artificial intelligence has inserted itself into our lives, its important decisions for us every day. Often we barely notice, as Joe Allen writes in this groundbreaking book, transhumanism is the great merger of humankind with the machine. No novel idea there. Everybody's listening is going to be familiar with that. At this stage in history, it consists of billions using smartphones. Going forward, it will be a hardwiring our brains to artificial intelligence systems. True. The world famous robot Sophia symbolizes the rising techno-religion. True. She takes her name from the goddess or Aeon, whose fall from grace is described in Gnostic Gospels. Again, true. With an academic background in both science and theology, Allen confronts the paradox of what he calls good people constructing a digital abomination. Dark Aeon is nothing less than a cri de coeur for humanity itself. He takes us on a roller coaster ride through history and the emergence of scientism, from government-mandated mRNA vaccines to weird visions of cyborg billionaires like Elon Musk. From Silicon Valley to China, these globalist visions for humanity's future exposed and described in Dark Aeon are dire and terrifying, but Joe Allen argues that humanity's salvation is within our grasp. Now, again, you go like, let's see here. It's the first comprehensive critical analysis. That's how it's presented. It's the first comprehensive critical analysis. I would beg to differ, but it actually is a really good work. He has a lot of information that's actually hard to find that I've found in my own research. And that's where I was a little bit bummed out. I was a little bit bummed out because the way he writes, the voice of this book, for anybody who are sort of literati heads and really like reading, it's more of it's almost like me doing a live stream. It's more conversational, the sort of colloquium phrases, the way he expresses himself. He uses a lot of I, where, in an academic work, you actually never use I. The point is not to present your subjective opinion. Now, obviously, we can call the question the academia and the quality of work that's being presented in the universities now, but divorced from that, I'm trying to really take and really describe much of what he does here, but to dive deeper. So like it's presented as a sort of philosophical, a comprehensive examination of the philosophical underpinnings. Yet, for my work, I really went into the literature of transhumanism. I wanted to know, like, what is the philosophical underpinning? So when you're looking at epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, for example, their epistemology is often described as a sort of critical rationalism. This comes out of the work of Karl Popper, in which they reject justificationism. So I'm sure you guys listen to Jay Dyer, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. FDA is phenomenal at looking at philosophy and justification for presuppositional belief system. This is the whole point of like the tag apologetic approach, right? But that all works based on the necessity to justify true beliefs and how you ground true beliefs in a paradigm. Now, transhumanism actually rejects, coming out of Karl Popper, they adopt critical rationalism. They reject the necessity for justification itself in favor of falsifiability. And this was sort of novel movement of the 20th century, and how you can sort of get around some of the epistemological problems of the Enlightenment, right? So Joe Allen doesn't really go into that depth. He doesn't talk about, in regard to metaphysics, like what is the unifying force, what is the foundation of being within transhumanism. From my reading, I didn't see him talk about functionalism once. And so one of the things that I write about is that functionalism, which is a theory of mind. So for these transhumanists, like, you guys understand, metaphysics is about the sort of philosophy of being. And the metaphysics of transhumanism is really the way that they unify the world is based on functionality. So the theory of mind, functionalism, argues that mind, or what we call mind, is essentially an emergent property. So it has to do with the high level of synaptic connections within the human brain, in that the human brain performs all these functions. And this is how we know, quote unquote, it's conscious or sentient, because consciousness is the hard problem of philosophy, which still has no answers. And this is really actually something we were talking about in our members groups, my think tank that we met this past Wednesday. We were talking about, one of the gentlemen is an experimental physicist, and he was describing how all, modern cosmology and theories built upon Darwinian theory of evolution, that these are abstractions upon abstractions, and that experimental physics actually kind of undercuts a lot of this stuff. And that's built on like actual science, actual experimental results. And you have then scientism building these paradigms, building these mythologies around experimental physics, but not really rooted in, quote unquote, science. And the same thing is true in transhumanism. So transhumanism has built this entire paradigm, which I would also agree with, and what I'm trying to argue is a sort of techno-religion. Now, I spend a lot more time than Joe does in regards to laying out the historical roots of this techno-religion, this techno-millenarian spirit, from really John Scotus Erigena through Roger Bacon, through Francis Bacon, all the way into the 20th century. But he does make mention of this stuff, and that's why I was kind of impressed by Joe Allen's work. It is well done for what it is, as a more popular read and getting into the depth of transhumanism. It really does do that. I'm going to give him credit for that. But in regards to metaphysics and transhumanism, like, the hard problem of consciousness is still yet to be proven, right? This is why it's still the hard problem. And some people have argued this is why philosophy's been in a sort of dead end, because there was all these things that philosophy was trying to accomplish. Of course, it kind of undercut itself in the 20th century regarding epistemology, logical positivism, the knowability of the external world, phenomenology, existentialism, leading into postmodernism, all this different stuff. But there are still strong, good dimensions within philosophy. But transhumanism builds upon the idea that consciousness, which is still a hard problem, is yet proven, but the whole enterprise of transhumanism is built on a theory of mind called functionalism, which is different from identity theory. It's different from hylomorphism. It's different from these other theories of mind. And they argue that what consciousness is really just a performative function. And so if we can add 2 + 2 = 4, and if a calculator can add 2 + 2 = 4, we can see a sort of functional compatibility between these two things. And this is where they argue for advanced artificial intelligence becoming sentient. Now, how can something become sentient when they don't even know what consciousness is? It's a problem, but one that they don't really discuss, because for them, as long as the computer can functionally perform all that a human brain or a human being can perform, well, then for all intents and purposes, it has surpassed, or is at least equated with, a human mind. So I'm saying all this to highlight that some of the philosophical depth of transhumanism isn't presented in this book. And that gives me a little bit of hope, because this book's probably going to sell way more than my book's going to be. And that, it kind of breaks my heart, but it lets me know that there is room to sort of build upon and maybe this book being a more of a popular read into transhumanism and its history will allow other readers to dive a little bit deeper into my work. Because if one thing I found out from doing this YouTube channel is the highly academic intellectual stuff is not the most popular. So I really like the nitty gritty, the in-depth, the highfalutin philosophy and academic jargon, but most people don't. Most people like a more popular read. And in that regard, Joe Allen's book, the Dark Aeon, is going to totally outperform mine in regards to it. And he has a platform. Steve Bannon has been promoting it and stuff like that. So in regards to ethics, I was just going to mention their paradigm, virtue ethics, utilitarian ethics. This is kind of the root of transhumanist ethics in regards to improving the world. It's much more utilitarian because it's much more about improving consequences. There's going to be a difference between like deontological ethics of like the Kantian tradition, where you have a moral duty. You have a moral duty to do something despite the consequences that may come from it, where utilitarianism is all focused on the consequences. That really dictates the good and what is best for the collective, right? So Joe Allen doesn't do that depth of philosophy, but overall, I'm pretty impressed. And where he does something that I'm going to kind of borrow from him is the immense connection he's drawn with Satanism and contemporary transhumanism. Now, obviously, much of the argument that I've laid out to you guys is that transhumanism is part of an anti-human satanic agenda. And we just talked recently about climate change, and climate change is really about this attack on carbon, right? So carbon is expanding from gas emissions and cow farts, and that we need to implement a new structure on energy, a new structure on the economy to reduce carbon. And I personally believe that this is a metaphor for life itself, that climate change, as I try to demonstrate in that stream, really does the exact opposite. And it being a sort of mythological narrative, does the opposite of what it's presented to do. We even looked at technologies and all that different stuff. But anyways, transhumanism is also an anti-human, post-human agenda, and it really is satanic from a Christian perspective. One of my other critiques of Joe Allen's presentation is he's all comparing transhumanism to a Christian paradigm, but he never really lays out what type of Christian he is. Now, he talks about the L'Arc Catholic, the French Catholic tradition of being of a community based on being the sort of ark symbolic of Noah, but really focusing on the heart, being altruistic people, embodying the love and energies of Christ out in the world, which we're all for. He also criticizes the Catholic Church quite heavily and criticizes Protestantism and especially liberal progressive Christianity, all rightfully so. My work focuses more from a specifically Orthodox perspective, and that's where he's talking about self-deification, but nowhere in this book is the word theosis mentioned. Nowhere in this book is Eastern Orthodoxy mentioned. And I don't fault Joe Allen. Most Americans have never heard of Orthodoxy. Most Americans have no idea what theosis or our theology actually teaches. So I don't fault him there. But I don't think you can fully articulate the self-deifying process of technology that transhumanism is putting forth without understanding the deifying process of becoming gods through grace, that theosis, that orthodoxy explicitly lays forth and is part of the historical faith of the church and all these other forms of sanctification that have got developed, aspects of it in Catholicism, aspects of it in Methodist Protestantism. But obviously, Orthodoxy is the groundwork for theosis and understanding how we relate to God, how we engage with God, and how we become deified in this process. So it's totally absent in this work. And that would be one of my criticisms, is that his Christianity, and he's constantly making references to looking at the beast system described in scripture, looking at 666, looking at descriptions of the Antichrist. But one of the problems is on what hermeneutic and what exegetical basis are you interpreting the scripture from? And for him, and it's not that he gets a lot of it wrong. I'm not even going to say that, but it's kind of a Protestant, like I can read it and come to ultimate conclusions because I know what's being said, where for us Orthodox, the tradition that's held all this stuff together, it is the exegetical and hermeneutic lens in which we read scripture from. And I think that's really helpful when we're looking at how transhumanism correlates or contrasts with Christian theology. So that's going to be one of my, Joe Allen is heterodox, and he uses Rudolf Steiner. So it's very interesting. Rudolf Steiner is not even exactly Christian, although he has very nice things to say about Christ. He has a significant portion using Rudolf Steiner talking about Lucifer and the conceptions of Satanism and the devil in contrast to Christ as a sort of framework that he's utilizing to couch transhumanism in, which again, for me as an Orthodox Christian and somebody who's trying to dive in and grasp and the contours of this topic in an academic jargon, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Rudolf Steiner was a perennialist, and if you're against sort of relativism and everybody has their own truth, well, at a fundamental philosophical level, you using Rudolf Steiner kind of promotes and advances that worldview. But anyways, I digress. So we're going to listen to Joe Allen. We're going to hear him talk a little bit about this book. Do I recommend this book? Yeah, it's a pretty good book. It really is a pretty good book. Am I a little bit jealous that he got it out before my dissertation? Yes, I am. I'm a little bit upset by that, a little bit heartbroken. But I think the depth that I'm trying to approach this topic with will, in a way, sort of bolster some of his arguments, but in a sort of a deeper way. So, anyways, that's kind of what we're going to get into today. As I already kind of pulled up, I do want to read this one to you because the way in which Satanism and Lucifer is associated with sorry there, technological glitch. The ways in which transhumanism relates to Satanism and Lucifer is actually a sort of important topic. And I want to read that little article there by Max Moore talking about why Lucifer is such an important figure for the transhumanist movement in its opposition to Christianity and to Christ. So I want to do that. We're going to talk more about this topic. We're going to listen to Joe Allen kind of present the research of his book. And one of the things that he does do, I'll give him great credit for, is he really does a good job of highlighting the ambiguity of transhumanist political ideology. So looking at people like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, a lot of people would think that transhumanism must be part of this communistic one world government and that it all goes hand in hand. But really, when you look at the big movers and shakers, it's more of a diverse bag. They're more libertarian because they're all about individual agency, individual liberty. And he does a really good job at highlighting how Elon Musk is, shoulder deep in the transhumanist movement, and that this sort of him being a salvific figure for conservative Christianity or conservative America kind of is a misnomer. Not that he may not agree with some of our political ideologies or the limiting of government or advancing personal freedom like free speech. I'm sure he is. But as he highlights, the devil's champion, the Halloween costume he wore a couple years ago, which was his ex profile pic for the longest time. Some people have really speculated about his spiritual orientation. And more recently, since I saw a clip where, he's giving out $1 million for his America PAC for people in Pennsylvania who sign up in support of the Constitution, that he said, I believe in Christian values and Christian teachings. Now, it doesn't say he believes in Christianity, doesn't say he believes in Jesus Christ, but in a way, potentially the sort of utilitarian usage of Christian teachings that maybe he understands as a foundation to Western civilization. And so in his attempt to sort of protect Western civilization, he sees that one has to protect, quote unquote, Christianity. But, him dressing up as the devil's champion and a lot of the technology. I mean, Neuralink, for example, is all about first healing people, right? So if you are a paraplegic, you can get a Neuralink, and then somebody who can't vocalize to you and you can't vocalize back, or you can now communicate through a digital interface in which it understands your brainwaves. Now, is that a good thing? If my mother or somebody of my family got incredibly ill and they couldn't speak anymore, and that some Neuralink may allow them to speak what I want? Well, probably not, because of my orientation towards transhumanism. But could I see a friend, or could I see people in the world seek value from a Neuralink implant that would allow them to communicate with a loved one before maybe they passed? Yeah, I could see why that's beneficial. But healing is always moving towards enhancement, and the explicit goal, whether it be Peter Thiel's Ambrosia, which was his Ambrosia was his startup company that I think is now defunct, but was, and I've talked to you guys before about living vampires, where you can inject the blood of younger people to rejuvenate tissue, which is a scientific fact. We know that's the case. Certainly gives credence to myths throughout history of entities or people potentially drinking blood or taking in blood of youthful people to try to rejuvenate themselves or appear younger. We see all these Hollywood stars talking about putting circumcised blood from children on their face to help get rid of their wrinkles. So this stuff leads to, it always begins with healing. Neuralink's going to heal the paraplegic. It's going to allow them to have a better quality of life. But Elon Musk, if you go to the Neuralink website, I've done this in previous streams, it is explicit that the only endpoint of our relationship with technology is a full merger with. So Neuralink, as it's being presented right now, is like, oh, it's so great for the people, the paraplegics or the blind that might be able to see again. And fair enough. But don't you see how this is a sort of inversion of Christ's miracles? This is a sort of inversion of man's dominion over creation, using technology to fulfill what are perceived miracles in the world, miraculous healings, helping people do things that they've never done before, leading towards the annihilation of the Imago Dei by a full synthesis with the machine itself. So, Joe Allen does a great job at highlighting this sort of political ambiguity that a lot of people don't see. For example, Max Moore, who we're getting ready to read In Praise of the Devil here, his article, he himself actually despises Yuval Noah Harari because Max Moore is very pro-libertarian. And so as the World Economic Forum is advancing the centralized one world government on a digital grid, despite Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus, who we talked about before, being explicitly transhuman, and his religion of dataism we've talked about before. Max Moore right here actually was, according to Joe Allen, reached out to him and was upset that he sort of grouped him in with all these WEF figures. So transhumanism does have differences of opinion within the groups of people, maybe political orientations, economic structure, stuff like that. But the goal is still the same end result. It is a human merger with technology for the sole purpose of what they perceive as evolutionary improvement. You and I, as biological entities, are antiquated. We are done with. The evolutionary process, according to these transhumanists, is now occurring in technology at such a faster rate than biology that we are going to have to merge with the technology to sort of like a surfer stay on the leading wave of this evolutionary trajectory. That's kind of their framework. So even Elon Musk, despite him being pro-Trump, pro-MAGA, doing all this stuff, free speech on X, which he says things that I may agree with, and I certainly support the movement of the Overton window on X, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that his fundamental worldview is a transhumanist agenda, spacefaring or civilization. This is replete throughout the sort of sci-fi novels that ground transhumanist prophecies and endeavors, right? So just want to highlight all that stuff. Smash that like, guys. I do want to do a few quick things before we totally get started here, and that is my dono chat stopped working during my last stream, and a few people had sent in a dono chat and did not receive my reading of their comments. And so I want to do that right now before we get started. I want to give a sincere apology to anybody who sent in a dono chat. We had 3, and the first one came from Sincere Hypocrite. This was on the climate change stream we did last week. And he said, climate change agenda is linked with Malthusianism. True. Just like many other secular neoliberal ideologies, only orthodoxy pushes back. And I can't wait to start catechesis at the start of next year. Well, glory to God, Sincere Hypocrite. Thank you very much for that $3.99 super chat. And Justin Henley sent in $20 and said, God bless you, your family, and all the champions in your live chat. Thank you very much, Justin Henley. Do appreciate that. And shout out to everybody in the live chat today. Smash that like. If you guys want to support my work, my research, and this YouTube channel, feel free to send in a super chat using Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. And if you're really feeling generous, feel free to gift some COTEL Crew memberships here on the YouTube. I know a lot of people would appreciate that. And then Nectarios sent in also $20, says, thank you for all the work you do. God bless you. Thank you very much, Nectarios, for that support. And then Justin Henley sent in $20 yesterday during the premiering of my conversation with Cody Lowe. I recorded a podcast about a year ago with Cody Lowe. He has a YouTube channel and podcast in which he wanted me to discuss the sort of historical relationship of psychedelics with Christianity, which I argue, based on my research, is really tied with the Gnostic tradition and a Gnostic heresy of inebriation and sort of spiritual gnosis or insight occurring during that inebriating process. And he said, have you any content specifically on Fools for Christ, or shall I sponsor a stream? And I got back to him in the live chat, but I just want to say thank you, Justin Henley, for the support. And I would be very happy to do a sponsored stream on Fools for Christ, because that is a topic I have not fully covered. It's been pieces of a stream, but I've never done a full stream going over the Fools for Christ within the Orthodox Church, important saints, their life stories, and what a fool for Christ really is and why it's important. So if that's something that you would be interested in sponsoring, please do so. I'd greatly appreciate that. So those were just a few of the super chats that I missed. And so before we dive deeper in today's stream, guys, I just want to do some quick housekeeping, if you will. And the first one is, if you guys want to support my work, one of the best things you can do is go over to my website and become a website member. Like I said, we just had a think tank meeting this past Wednesday. So this week we don't have one, and we will have another one potentially the day after the election. We normally do the second and third Wednesday of every month. So anybody who joins, some people have asked, hey, where's the calendar for where your think tank meetings? Think tank meetings are the second and third Wednesday of every month. And the fitness meetings are the first Monday of every month, for anybody who wanting to know. I do have a description saying all that stuff. But if you also want access to all my video library and all my show notes that I've been posting, that's just a $5 membership. If you get it the annual subscription, you get 2 months free. It's a great way to support me and my work. I'd greatly appreciate that. Also, if anybody would like to sign up for a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here. I'd greatly appreciate that. We can get into a private Zoom meeting and talk about any topic your heart desires. And as Justin Henley suggested, potentially sponsoring a stream on Fools for Christ, you can do so with this link right here, of which I would greatly appreciate. This is for premium sponsored streams, of which I spend basically at least a day dedicated to researching the topic. Sometimes they're more. For example, the one on Russia Before the Second Coming, that's basically an 800-page book that I've been getting through. Although I'll only be presenting 3 chapters, I hope to do that either later this week or early next week, potentially Sunday. That's going to be the next sponsored stream we'll be doing. And so if you have a sponsored stream topic that you would like me to dive into, do some research, and then perform and present here on the YouTube channel, please use that link. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, if anybody is interested in some of our discussions on eschatology, again, the Russia Before the Second Coming is all over at eschatonvigil.org. I'm working with a non-for-profit called Eschaton Vigil, and we are in mostly the Eschaton Vigil. I haven't done so much, but translating so many eschatological prophecies and visions from saints and elders of the church into English for the very first time. So whether it be in Russian, Bulgarian, Serbian, Greek, whatever it may be, we're finding so many things that are only in those languages and translating them all into English and making the eschatonvigil.org essentially the ultimate hub in the world for English speakers to learn about eschatology and the visions of the end time by various saints and elders. So if that's something you would be interested in, check that out. Would greatly appreciate anybody supporting us there. So let me share that link. And we're going to soon be having a monthly meeting. So if you're a member there, you don't only get access to thousands of prophecies and full translations of books like Russia Before the Second Coming, but we're going to be soon starting monthly meetings. And In addition, once I can sort of finish my PhD, we'll be doing courses of various topics and stuff like that. So the whole goal is to build a really in-depth community focused on these topics and looking at eschatology and the approaching end times from an Orthodox Christian perspective. So major shout out to the Eschaton Vigil. And also, if you guys are in the market for any Orthodox items, be them icons, prayer ropes, although I got this one from Vashon Monastery where Abbot Trifon is, check out orthodoxdepot.com. It's a good Orthodox company here in the Midwest United States, owned and operated by Orthodox Christians. Use promo code COTEL. You'll get 10% off any products. And it's a good way to help me out, as well as an Orthodox company that has incense lamps, crosses, t-shirts, hats, all types of stuff. Use promo code COTEL and you'll get 10% off. Okay, now we can start to get into today's topic. So the first thing I want to say is just a quick little overview of this book. I want to say that what he does, the key dimensions of the Dark Aeon, is a sort of philosophical and ethical examination of transhumanism. He sort of connects transhumanism with historical and philosophical precedents, critiquing it as a form of technological determinism that will potentially strip away the essential human values in favor of machine-driven efficiency. He also discusses the religious and spiritual analysis, although, again, my critique here is like, what form of Christianity, what Christian perspective are you coming from? He doesn't really lay that out. It's more just his reading of scripture and comparing progressive liberal Christianity, aspects of the Catholic Church, stuff like this. Again, orthodoxy is not mentioned once. Theosis is not mentioned once. And but he contends that transhumanism promises of immortality and digital salvation mirror but distort spiritual doctrines, turning humanity away from traditional spiritual pursuits. He looks at the socio-political impact and discusses how increased reliance on AI, biotechnology, and genetic engineering can deepen social inequalities. Very obvious there. And performs a sort of a cultural critique in which body modification, AI, and the increasing symbiosis between humans and machines, he suggests that these are cultural shifts subtly normalizing transhumanist values, which I agree with. One of the things that he doesn't capitalize on, that at least I'm trying to do, is I'm surprised with the Christian religious emphasis of this book. He does not connect the eschatological import, right? So looking at the salvific dimension of technology through history, really beginning in the Middle Ages. And he highlights David Noble's research, The Religion of Technology, looking at how technology was viewed as a way in which Christians who are favored by God were going to fight against the Antichrist. And this was actually held on to by many Protestants who were breaking away from the Catholic Church. And it fueled some of the Rosicrucian, Illuminati, Freemasonic associations with Protestantism too, in that, you know, the 30 Years' War, the Winter King, you know, Frederick the Elector Palatine sort of being elevated as this hermetic Christian Protestant king figure that's going to sort of take in the esoteric knowledge of history lost with Christianity and create this sort of utopian kingdom. This was part of the Rosicrucian manifestos. But all of that is tied with eschatology. And he mentions it briefly, especially regarding Joachim Fiore, if you guys are familiar with the Cistercian abbot who believed in like the 3 ages of history. But one of the important strands of transhumanism as it relates to Christianity is that it is ultimately a competing eschatological vision of historical time. Transhumanism is obviously in a favor of a sort of progressive unfolding of novelty and knowledge and advancement. And that then culminates in an endpoint in history called the singularity. You guys know Ray Kurzweil, the singularity is near, all this different stuff, where essentially through Moore's law, the exponential increase in technology, they believe that they're going to reach a singularity and an exponential endpoint in which technology will become so advanced, so intelligent, that one AI will surpass the collective human intelligence on Earth, and it will begin a feedback loop, cybernetics, a feedback loop system of self-improvement and self-defining and coding itself, writing its own code, all this different stuff, in which there will be a runaway effect, and technology will be so powerful and so dominant that this is the transformation. This is the historic endpoint. You can see how this is an inversion of the second coming of Christ. We are building through the Tower of Babel the AI God that's getting ready to emerge in comparison to the transcendent God who is going to come in imminent space and time. And this eschatology fuels the endeavor of transhumanism, and fuels transhumanism is really a religious orientation, right? I mean, it's quite clear. This is fused with scientism. And this is one of the things that Joe does a good job of in this book, is talking about how scientism really is a replacement for religion as viewed by many people in the 20th century. And that is the case. Scientism is replete with an aura of sacredness in our contemporary society. The man in the white coat really is the priest of the 21st century. And this is why I think the coup in 2020 and Dr. Fauci and getting your Fauci out was so detrimental to the religion of scientism, because it called into question this whole consensus reality. Scientism is not based on consensus, but we are now told through things like climate change and the coup that we have to listen to the science. We have to listen to the scientists. We have to listen to the priests in the white coats who aren't actually performing science. They're regurgitating a mythology in which we have to abide by. If not, we are bad little boys and girls and probably need to be punished and deplatformed. So transhumanism ultimately is an eschatological worldview that is built upon whether you believe minds can be uploaded into a computer. I personally do not believe that to be the case. I do not believe that the mind is a emergent property that functionalist theories of mind accurately describes. I believe it's tied with the soul that really is made in the image of God, and that our noetic faculties are divine, are unique to us, and not something that can ever be replicated in a machine. And so that is a dimension of this transhumanist Christian relationship that I would say Joe kind of misses on. But I'm not here to. This isn't a immense critique of the book. It's good for what it is. It actually is really good for what it is. But ultimately, it's an eschatological vision. This is one of the things that I hint on, and he talks about self-deification. But again, the lack of Orthodox understanding or any reading of Orthodox theology. And when listening to Joe talk, what I've listened to a few, he does seem very critical of the Catholic Church. I'm curious what his opinions would be of Orthodoxy, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was very critical of these sort of traditional forms of religion. I'm not sure. I'd be curious what his thought process is on that. I've never heard him actually address or say anything about Orthodoxy. But anyways, therefore, all that being said, transhumanism really is a satanic ideology that is competing with religion from an Orthodox perspective, and is interested in, again, an inverted form of theosis. So you're going to merge with God. Well, which God? The AI God. And I have, at least in my work, I've documented multiple articles in which these transhumanists talk about how their God, unlike the people that believe in traditional religion, their God is a natural entity. They believe that intelligence, and this is one of the problems with transhumanism too, that I've never heard defended by a transhumanist, is the random mutation of Darwinian theory, which is obviously essential to their worldview. Because of Darwinian theory, their metaphysics, there is no essence, there is no nature to human beings. You exist on an evolutionary spectrum of becoming, and therefore the only thing that unites life is through functionalism, the theory of mind, which then therefore grants space for cyborgs and artificial intelligence and robots to be categorized as other forms of life based on their functional capabilities. That this Darwinian theory, there is no there, right? And so for transhumanists, one of the things that I've never heard defended is how is it that evolution is leading towards increased intelligence, which culminates in the advanced AI? Meanwhile, Darwinian theory says it's total random mutation. So are you telling me there's a telos to evolution? Their theory essentially states that as fact. And they say it all the time, that evolution is leading towards greater and greater intelligence. And they say this is based on the fact that Homo sapiens exists and we are the superior apex species on the planet, and therefore this logically concludes that evolution is leading towards the creation of higher forms of intelligence. Well, if that's the case, it's not totally random mutation, and therefore then evolution has a telos, a purpose, an end in sight, which they again equate with the AI God. So I've never heard a transhumanist actually address that. Yeah, Harari, exactly. JC Owen says Harari says evolution has stopped. And essentially what they claim is that biological evolution takes multiple generations to occur, and technology is advancing so fast that within one generation, evolution can occur in technology, at a multiplicated rate. Whereas biology, we will essentially stay biological entities with very slow evolutionary progress unless we hitch ourselves to the wagon of technology. And so transhumanism views our understanding of the incarnation differently, right? Because it's essentially saying that the AI will become incarnate. So there's multiple things here that transhumanism is doing that is explicitly an inversion of Christianity, which transhumanism comes out of Western civilization. So it's replete with Christian motifs because it comes from that cultural ethos. So the AI becomes sentient. This is a sort of reversed incarnation, not as a person, but as an abstract technological awareness. That you, theosis, you will become like God, not by following Christ, not through the uncreated energies, not through a moral and pietistic and ascetic life, not through the perseverance through suffering, but by allowing Elon Musk to put in Neuralink implants, by allowing genetic engineering, by all these different things, by cryonic preservation, so that once the technology allows you to upload your mind into a robot body, that you'll be there. And so eschatology, deification, the incarnation, all these things, and there's multiple more, but that's not the point of today's stream. So we'll, if you guys want, I can do a stream specifically on the inversions of Christianity and transhumanism. There's many more. Like, for example, again, this isn't the point. So let me just say this as a quick side note, and then let's get to the actual point of today's stream. But, their rejection of the body. Right. So for the transhumanists, they worship intelligence. They worship mind. This is why Yuval Noah Harari and his religion of Dadaism is so emphatic on the belief that you and I are algorithms, that we are biological algorithms. The only thing that differentiates me and you and a tomato or a giraffe is the amount of information that we take in, our ability to process that information and come towards conclusions. And so if a robot, if an artificial intelligence is also, it's a synthetic algorithm, not a biological algorithm, and it can come to conclusions and cipher through information and be connected with machines that are exploring space, well, then that's a superior form of intelligence. And so they worship the mind, and you can look at Desjardins' Omega theory. It's essentially a hive mind, a collective mind, in its absence of a body. Where Christianity, Christ's incarnation, tells us that the body is special. This is actually a unique religious dimension of Christianity, is the dignity of the human body, that God himself took on human flesh. And so this incarnation also brings into this inverted understandings of the human body, and how transhumanism is, again, another sort of religious orientation that is clearly contrasted with traditional Christian notions. So anyways, I could do a whole nother stream on that topic. We're going to digress there. So without further ado, let me read this article to you, because you'll see here that Max Moore does not arguing that he believes in a literal devil, right? He believes in the Lucifer and Satan as a useful entity in opposition to the sort of hegemonic problem of Christianity. And so I want to read this little love note to Satan. And also, if you guys have good ideas for my dissertation topic title, I was actually thinking about naming it "In Praise of the Devil." Theories of deification between transhumanism and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, or something like that. Because when you read trans Orthodox Christian theologians talking about transhumanism, one of the things that they're very open about, much more so than Catholics and Protestants, is that it's openly satanic. There is a large segment of Protestants that actually view transhumanism as part and parcel of the coming New Jerusalem, which is what the historical transhumanist techno-millenarian movement was rooted in, is a returning to Eden, a returning to the garden, a returning to Adamic knowledge before the fall. That what technology is going to do is restore all the attributes that were lost due to the fall, and that maybe we were previously clairvoyant. Well, technology is going to provide that for us. And so this progressive thought pattern, this intellectual history that I'm trying to trace, and David Noble has done it in The Religion of Technology, is highlighting that technology is the restoration of Adam and Eve before the fall. And for transhumanists, especially in the contemporary period, Lucifer comes up multiple times. Julian Huxley, in his 1957 book, literally talks about transhumanism being the sort of Promethean promise to humanity. Prometheus, the Greek figure who brought the fire of the gods to humanity, is sort of a Luciferian figure, Lucifer being the light bringer, right? So when we refer to Lucifer, you can mix and match with Prometheus. It's basically the same concept, the same entity. And so be it Julian Huxley, be it Max Moore, for them, Lucifer and the devil is a way in which they view the knowledge of scientific and technological advance is aiding and abetting the development of humanity in opposition to the antiquated, resistant dimensions of traditional religion, specifically Christianity. When you read transhumanists, they hate Christianity more than any other religion, although they really don't like any religion. Maybe Eastern mysticism, Buddhism, and Shintoism, because there's been stuff done by Robert Garassi. He's an academic that is kind of in favor of transhumanism. He doesn't really take a strong stance for or against, but he has done good research documenting what he calls apocalyptic AI. And he's also done work looking at Japan in the robot industry and how Buddhism and Shintoism, because of their sort of naturalistic metaphysics, they believe that a robot really can acquire personhood. Well, we as Christians, being made in the image of God, we do not believe a robot can acquire the imago Dei. If anything, the only thing the robot can acquire is the fallen image of God, not the fullness of the image and likeness which we're called to through theosis, through the advance of a moral, pietistic, ascetic life in pursuit of Christ, trying to become more like Christ. So I just say all this, that when we read this, you'll see how Lucifer is really embodied within the transhumanist movement. Now, we just got a super chat, and I want to give a very special thank you to Abject Fool, who just sent in a generous $50. Thank you very much, Abject Fool. He says, theology, philosophy, heretical sects, geopolitics, history of geopolitical espionage, spiritual warfare. Following all your amazing deep dive hurts my secular thinking and expectations as I slowly turn more toward truth. Well, glory to God, Abject Fool. I hope that anything I've done has been beneficial. I'm humbled if it has, but really this YouTube channel and my work, it's me doing, I want to know for myself, right? So I love presenting information. And if that has been beneficial to anything in regards to your own spiritual journey and your relationship to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, I am greatly humbled. And I thank you very much for the generous $50 super chat. So thank you very much, Abject Fool. And just let me double check real quick on Dono Chat. Okay, nothing came in on Dono Chat and nothing on Streamlabs. So, okay, well, let's continue forward a little bit here. So this is this article again, Max Moore. Who's Max Moore? I mentioned earlier, he's kind of the leading philosopher of transhumanism, although there's a handful. Nick Bostром's another one over in Oxford. But Max More, he's kind of the father of what's called extropianism. Extropianism is a philosophical dimension of transhumanism, not adopted necessarily by everyone, but its central premises is that extropianism is pursuing unlimited advance, unlimited progress, unlimited life, unlimited pleasure, right? And that the opposition of extropianism, which is a term he created, is entropy, right? So entropy is about the degradation of energy. And he posits that extropianism is really the sort of central thrust and underpinnings of transhumanist philosophy, and therefore it's a philosophy of life, it's a philosophy of expansion, it's a philosophy of human flourishing and potentials. But here is his article, which he wrote, I believe this is 1991. I was getting ready to say 1990, in which he says he titles it "In Praise of the Devil," which I'm really contemplating using as my book title, "In Praise of the Devil," to really, and you guys help me out on some. If you guys, again, the Dark Aeon, like that's a great title. That's a great title that I need to figure out. So if you have some good titles, feel free to send them to me. I'd very much like them. But let's read this. So he says, this article is written in praise of Satan, Lucifer, the devil, or whatever you want to call him. I must first make clear that I am not here claiming ontological status for the devil. So kind of like Anton LaVey, which, is questionable. Did LaVey really not believe that Satan exists, performing those rituals, or all the demons that he claimed to summon were they just symbols or were they real entities? Well, I do believe Max More, because of his hatred for Christianity and religion, that he does not believe in a theistic notion, an ontologically real devil or Satan. I do, but he's saying that he does not. He's not arguing for the ontological status. That is, I am not claiming that he exists in the sense that you and I exist. I'm quite serious on a symbolic level in what I write about, but my statements presenting the devil and attacking Christianity, God, and Jesus are not to be taken as implying the real existence of any of these supposed beings. The only one of these that I think could reasonably believe actually exists is Jesus. It seems probable that there was a human being who was a political and religious leader at the time, though it seems to me absurd to believe claims about his origin or divine nature. Now, again, they reject metaphysically all natures and essences, so that makes sense. My praise of the devil, according to Max More, is not entirely, though it is mostly serious, and it is to be taken on a purely symbolic level. My goal is to bring out the values and perspectives of the Christian tradition and to demonstrate how it is fundamentally at odds with the values held by myself and all extropians, the philosophy he developed that undergirds transhumanism, and with the perspective we share. A force for good, he says. The devil, Lucifer, is a force for good, where I define good simply as that which I value, not wanting to imply any universal validity or necessity to the orientation. Lucifer means light bringer, and this should begin to clue us into his symbolic importance. The story is that God threw Lucifer out of heaven because Lucifer had started to question God and was spreading dissension among the angels. Not entirely true. The theology here is that the pride to be worshipped, this is the reason why Lucifer fell. He wanted to be worshipped in opposition to God. And we can see how Lucifer, and the desire to be worshipped, kind of fulfills the transhumanist agenda to pursue immortality and omniscience through a fusion with the machines. The story is that God threw Lucifer out of heaven because Lucifer had started to question God and was spreading dissension among the angels. We must remember that this story is told from the point of view of the goddess, if I may coin a term, and not from the Luciferians. I will use this term to distinguish us from the official Satanists with whom I have fundamental differences. The truth may just as easily be that Lucifer resigned from heaven. Oh, okay, he just got tired of it. God, being the well-documented sadist that he is, no doubt wanted to keep Lucifer around so he could punish him and try to get him back under God's power. No, this is not a power struggle. This has to do with an eternal relationship with the source of all creation. And so if you are objecting to and negating the source of eternal existence, the idea is if you make that decision within eternity, you are devoid of life itself because you are devoid of God and God's energies. And this is why he is the father of lies. This is why he's associated with death. And the angels that followed him, which according to our tradition says a third of the angelic hierarchy followed Lucifer during his fall. And Lucifer was the prettiest, right? He was the most beautiful of the angels. He worshiped himself, that they made that decision within eternity and their salvation is already fixed, that they can't change. And this is why the spiritual warfare on humanity is so important, because the only way that Lucifer and the angels can get back at God, this mean sadist, according to Max Moore, is by possession and the influencing of humanity to destroy voluntarily through our free will, which is created in the image of God and cannot be violated, so that we will destroy ourselves through sin. And that is the whole spiritual warfare. And so looking at it from a theological perspective, the beginning and end of creation in a sense has already occurred. God is outside space and time. He's outside historical continuity. We, at one fixed point on October 28th, 2024, we are witnessing a sliver of the historic time in which this warfare is taking place. So, anyways, probably what really happened, according to Max Moore, was that Lucifer came to hate God's kingdom. So he hated truth, beauty, love, mercy, compassion, honor, glory, everything that's good, true, and beautiful. Okay, he hated that. His sadism, his demand for slavish conformity and obedience, his psychotic rage at any display of independent thinking and behavior, Lucifer realized that he could never fully think for himself and could certainly not act on his independent thinking so long as he was under God's control. Therefore, he left heaven, that terrible spiritual state ruled by the cosmic sadist Jehovah, and was accompanied by some of the angels who had enough courage to question God's authority and his value perspective. Lucifer is the embodiment of reason. I actually won't disagree with that, although it's ultimately irrational, right? So the instrumental use of reason in opposition to the creator of the universe is an irrational use of reason itself, of intelligence, of critical thought. He stands against the dogma of God and all other dogmas. He stands for the exploration of new ideas and new perspectives in the pursuit of truth. God demands that we believe everything that he tells us and that we do everything that he says without questioning. Destroy a tribe, including the woman, children, and animals, down to the last, Joshua 6:21. Why, of course. Wait a minute. This doesn't seem very nice. So we get the, this is like the TikTok deconstructionist, right? That Jay and I were going over is, if God, why bad thing happen? Theodicy, the existence of evil. If God, why would God allow the Canaanites to destroy Israel? Why would God tell Israel to destroy the Canaanites? This is pretty low tier stuff. Silence, fool. I love how it ends in all caps. Silence, fool. How dare you question me? I am God, and you must obey me without questioning. God doesn't force you to obey without questioning. God wants you to obey, but he gave you free will. He's not forcing you. Accept what I say on faith. Burn those who dare question my word. Destroy their books. Shut down their schools. Tell them that disobedience means that they will burn forever and ever in unimaginable agony for all eternity. And remember that you will suffer the same unless you go out and tell them this. That is the first page. And so, yes, sir, good God, sir, whatever you say. See, here I am burning their books, pulling out their nails, torturing them for questioning church dogma, banning the use of anesthetic in childbearing, since the pain is their punishment for the acts of Adam and Eve. Help, which again is a very interesting point here regarding transhumanism, is that the socialist utopian and utopian world presented by transhumanists is that it will alleviate all labor. Now, as an Orthodox Christian, what happens? What does God tell Adam and Eve when they're casted out of the garden? Man will toil and women will have increased birth pains. So women having pain or giving biological birth and men having to labor in the world is part of our salvific journey back to God, according to Genesis. Transhumanism, through the utilization of synthetic wombs and all this different stuff that they advance, they want to destroy biological birth, and they want to alleviate the man's obligation to toil so that there is no more physical labor. The robots do it all. And this is presented as utopia, whereas for an Orthodox Christian, this is hell. This is an inability for me to work out my salvation in accordance with God's plan. Do you see that? Thank you so much, Sung Kim. I'll read your super chat in just a second once I get through this. Help! I thought an improper thought. Help me blind my mind, God. Help me not see what my reason tells me. Let me repress thoughts of sexual desire, doubts about you and your orders, feelings of tolerance. I mean, this is one of the leading philosophers of transhumanism, and it sounds like an angry high school teenager. A force for rationality. They call Lucifer the prince of lies. A lie is defined by the Christian as anything which contradicts the word of God, as told to us by the Bible and God's representatives on earth. If we are to accept this definition of a lie, then we should praise lies. A lie is then a questioning of blind dogma. The lies of Lucifer are attacks on irrational beliefs based on fear and conformity to authority. Of course, we should not call these lies. They are temptations to think for ourselves, a call for independent thought, a plea for taking responsibility for our own thinking and our own lives. Praise Lucifer, says Max Moore. Excuse me. Praise the pursuit of truth through rationality. But is truth limited to rationality? Of course not. God was right to tell us not to worship false idols, but he refrained from telling us that all idols are false and that all worship is dangerous. Even our praise of Lucifer must not be worship of an idol, but rather an expression of our agreement with his value orientation and his perspective. And so if the theological worldview of Christianity is accurate, does Satan demand that you worship him? No. Satan demands that you reject God. Satan demands that you reject Christ. So whether Max Moore, at least from an Orthodox Christian perspective, thinks that he's not in the same ballpark as Satanists and theistic Satanists or hedonists or whatever, because they don't explicitly worship Lucifer, is totally false. As long as you're rejecting the creator of the universe, if you're rejecting the incarnation of God, you're already part and parcel of the team of the evil one. God and his goddess hate Lucifer's call for rationality. Critical thinking digs at the very roots of gods and their power over our minds. Independent thinkers do not make good slaves. Actually, they make great slaves. Lucifer is the prince of lies because he is an expert at helping us to be rational. He shows us how to use our intelligence and how to take responsibility for ourselves. We should emulate him in encouraging his trend in ourselves and in others. He needs help since he is working against the laziness and neuroticism of many humans. It's so much easier to just try to think, to sit back, or try not to think, to sit back and let other people tell you what you should do, what to believe, and where to give your money. Why? If I had to think for myself, I would have to face the fact that I might be wrong. Horrors. I would have to think carefully about my life and the reality that I live in carefully and would take a lot of work. No, it's much easier to have faith, to accept, to believe, to obey, which again, the whole transhumanist prophecies about this end times development is rooted on faith, right? These transhumanists are grounded in a faith-based orientation. Their entire worldview is built on a theory of mind that is not provable. Functionalism is not provable. The hard problem of consciousness has not been solved. And so you and your own orientation is built on faith, although, of course, for them, it's rational faith. Let's continue here. Next paragraph, the virtue of pleasure. God also hates us to enjoy ourselves. If we let ourselves experience too much pleasure, then we might lose interest in obeying him. We might start running our own lives to bring us positive rewards rather than directing ourselves to avoid his wrath. We might become focused on pursuing the positive instead of avoiding the negative. That would result in the downfall of religious and state authority. So God has to stamp out such tendencies. He hates Lucifer, who keeps turning up and tempting us to have a good time, to enjoy our lives. Adam and Eve's sin was to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. They dared to disobey a direct order which God expected them to obey without question, blindly. They acquired reason and intelligence to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. They acquired reason and intelligence and an ability to decide for themselves the values that they would pursue. Ever since then, humans have been uppity, always given God trouble. Damn it, even some of the Catholics are questioning the Pope's infallibility. Well, that's just tough, God. Some of us are going to do our best to see that humans continue to become even more difficult to handle by both you and your human followers on earth, the religious authorities, and the statists. And then virtue of selfishness. God likes altruism. Altruism understood as true self-sacrifice and not as giving up a minor value to achieve a more important one, which is just one aspect of rationality. If God can just get us all to be good altruists, then we will be so much easier to control. Altruists do what they are told without complaint. What? A complaint would be based in self-interest. It would be a claim to live one's own life without having to direct it towards the lives of others or towards the interests of God or the state. Lucifer preserves in trying to point out to us that we have no reason to accept altruism. We can choose our values for ourselves, just as we can think for ourselves. Lucifer himself values the pursuit of happiness, knowledge, and new experiences. Most of all, he values self-responsibility and independence, even if that means that some people will not choose to value the things that he values. The extropians among us, the transhumanists, who share his perspectives and value orientation, should help him in his work. God has a clever and nasty strategy to promote altruism and therefore obedience. He tries to get us to believe in original sin. He wants us to believe that we are born sinful and that we were evil and needed saving even before we had done anything. We need God for his agents to save us from sin. Otherwise, we will burn forever and we will miss out on an infinite and perfect reward. Our path to salvation lies in service to God and his dogma. Without the idea of original sin, we might not be so careful to obey God, since we might figure that we were living pretty well and would go to heaven anyway, foolishly failing to inquire what heaven is like. Fortunately for God, original sin guarantees that we will always feel under threat. We will always be unclean and in danger of suffering hellfire. So again, doesn't this sound like a high school teenager? This is an academic, guys. This is a PhD. This is one of the thought leaders of transhumanism. And so let's conclude with personal responsibility, the last section of his article in praise of the devil. To make quite sure that our personal responsibility is destroyed and that we put ourselves in God's hands for him to mold us as he wishes, God and his moronic minions repeatedly tell us that Jesus Christ is the way and that he died for our sins. That is true. We need the Giga Chad meme right now, where it's like the Giga Chad, like the ortho meme, and it's like he's looking and it's like, Max, God did die for your sins and Jesus loves you. Redemption lies through faith and obedience. Notice what happens when Christ supposedly died for our sins. His act brought about our possibility for salvation. Yes, he fused human nature and divine nature. Of course, Max Moore works on a continuum in which there is no human nature, there is no human essence. There's this evolutional becoming, and therefore, for him, the incarnation probably doesn't make sense because he rejects those categories outright. His act brought about our possibility of salvation. What I want to know is, how can someone else's act excuse me from anything? I am responsible for my own actions. Nothing that I do can take away from the fact that someone else is acting in a certain way, and nothing that they can do can absolve me from my own responsibility. Original sin and salvation by Christ are both deeply offensive ideas to me and all extropians, transhumanists, who value individual responsibility. In ending this discussion, I want to remind you that you are all popes. Oh, okay. So you're all the thing that you hate, somebody who's the head of an institutional authority. What? No, I get his point though. You guys are of the same status of the Pope. You're living in a sort of fictional world of institutional authority in the church. You are all your own highest authority. You are the source of your action. You choose your values, whether you do so actively or by default. You choose what you believe, how strongly you believe, and what you will take as a disconfirming evidence. Well, Max, if we get to choose what we believe and we're sort of all equal in our belief, doesn't that sort of therefore tell you that how can you say that I'm wrong? If my truth and my rational capabilities tells me that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, well, then that's how I've come to my own conclusion using my own faculties. I mean, your worldview doesn't even allow for objective truth. Pancritical rationalism, which Max Moore identifies as, doesn't even allow for the justifiable existence of objective truth. The whole thing is built on falsifiability. And one of the big critiques of pancritical rationalism or critical rationalism in general is that its continual premise on rational falsifiability doesn't allow for a justified understanding of reason itself, or how reason can be used, undergirding itself and demonstrating how it really is just another relativistic epistemologies. But we'll set that aside. You choose what to believe and how strongly to believe, and what you will take as disconfirming evidence. No one has authority over you. You are your own authority, your own value chooser, your own thinker. Join me, join Lucifer, join Extropia in fighting God and his entropic forces without minds, our wills, and our courage. I think it's supposed to be with our minds. It says without minds, with our wills, and our courage. God's army is strong, but they are backed by ignorance, fear, and cowardice. Reality is fundamentally on our side, forward into the light. And so I present this obviously as a ridiculous plea. Again, this is Max Moore, philosopher Max Moore, one of the leading thinkers of transhumanism, and his article In Praise of the Devil. And so my whole point in demonstrating this, and now we're going to get into this Joe Allen conversation on the Dark Aeon of the Ed Clay show. And this didn't even have over 1,000 views, which I was kind of blown away by. It's been up for 10 months. But, transhumanism isn't really a big topic. I've noticed this on my own channel, that when I do streams on transhumanism, they tend to not get the views if I do things on like black magic, witchcraft, demonism, Satanism, stuff like this. So it really doesn't get the same views. Maybe people just don't find transhumanism as a interesting topic or a legitimate threat. I'm not sure. But I bring up this article because Allen's thesis here in the Dark Aeon is that transhumanism really is an anti-human agenda, and it really is tied with a sort of oppositional force to Christianity, which I totally agree with, and that is the basis of my research as well. So smash that like. We're going to dive into this conversation. I'm going to speed it up, make sure it's at 1.25. They talk kind of slow, so you can't even really tell it's sped up. And so we're gonna do that. It looked like a couple super chats came in by my buddy Soom Kim. Shout out to Soom Kim. God bless you, brother. I hope you're doing well in Kami, California. He says, some dude tried to convince me that the Old Testament God is the devil based on event XYZ. Worth a stream? Yeah, I could. I mean, I've kind of talked about it, and really that belief is the basis of Gnosticism. And I've covered Gnosticism quite a bit on the channel. But Gnosticism, I mean, it's rooted, and I'm actually, shout out to AC. AC sponsored a stream on me talking about Marcionism, and I'm going to be doing that next week. And Marcionism is the belief that the God of the Old Testament is different than the God of the New Testament. Obviously, Gnosticism builds upon Marcionism, but as AC highlighted in the sponsor of the stream and some of the notes that he sent me, many popular figures are promoting Marcionism. So who even go by the nomenclature of Christian. So this isn't limited to Gnostics, and this is unfortunately a very popular conception. But if you just look at the intertwining of Old Testament prophecies in relationship to the Messiah, it's quite clear that the God of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament, and Jesus Christ is the Messiah. It is the Logos. It is the second person of the Trinity that is informing the prophets and informing the law and informing humanity from a very adolescent understanding, i.e. Adam and Eve, to a much more mature understanding. And this is why we as Christians are actually living in a privileged position. We live after the incarnation. This is a privileged ontology compared to those who lived before the incarnation. Although Christ defeating of Hades, he preached the gospel to everybody that was dead. So yeah, thank you, Soon Kim, for that. Really appreciate that. And he sent in another $10. Thank you so much, brother. And he says, someone in the chat said that you covered Marcionism. So no, yeah, there you go. And we'll be doing another one soon. So next week, I'll be doing a stream that was sponsored by AC on Marcionism and sort of contemporary conservative Christian culture, which will be very fun. So tune into that if you want to hear more about that. But thank you very much, Sung, for the support. God bless you, brother. Hope you're doing well. And let me just check the dono chat real quick before we go further. Okay, and let me check Streamlabs. Look like that's it. Okay, well, if you guys want to support, again, my work, you want to support my research, feel free to send in a super chat with a question or comment using Streamlabs or Dono chat. Or if you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. And if you'd like to help out people in the community, please give some COTEL Crew memberships. Everybody loves that. And so without further ado, let's get into this conversation here. We're going to start. It's kind of small talk. We'll start right here. And so let me get my speaker. And let's get started. So this is Joe Allen, the author of the Dark Aeon. As I said, he is one of the contributing writers for the War Room. He has a strong relationship, intimate relationship with Steve Bannon, who's currently in prison, and they extended his prison date so until it's after the election. He was supposed to get released before the election. At least what I read online on X is that, of course, the federal authorities have extended his release date, so he won't get free until after November 5th at some point. But Steve Bannon actually wrote the foreword to this book, and so we're going to hear him kind of talk about this stuff from his perspective.
There's the negative approach, say no. You know, if something crosses a boundary, whether it be a moral boundary or even just an aesthetic boundary, simply don't go there. Don't do it. It's as easy as that. But no philosophy can be purely negative. And I think that the people who are most opposed to the notion of radical technologies fully augmenting the human being to the point that the human being is no longer human in the sense that we once understood it, that tends to be one of two types. The majority, in my experience, are deeply religious. They have a sense of the human being as sacred, as reflecting a sacred form, the image of God, and other conceptions. And so they don't want that tampered with genetically, or they also tend to see the creation of these, proposed godlike artificial intelligences as a very blasphemous proposal. So that's one. And the other, a smaller group, but they're naturalists, atheists, really, atheists who see nature and the processes of nature as sacred. And they see the radical augmentation of humans and the rapid expansion of the techno-industrial civilizations around the world, from the West to the East and the Middle East, everything in between. They see that as being an incursion onto what is sacred, nature, and the destruction of nature. And so they're also quite opposed to transhumanism or post-humanism, whatever degree we're talking about, because they see it as a reckless use of human intellect and human ingenuity. And they see it as an even more rapid destruction of the natural world than we've seen for the last 250 years.
I mean, but wouldn't we already be somewhat transhuman in a way? Because I said this on another podcast, like, I feel like my grandparents' generation was the last full humans. I mean, we carry around cell phones. We're very, at least I can speak for myself, I'm very connected to it. I don't like the fact that I am, honestly, but it's kind of where I'm at in the world and where most of society is. Even my parents, I see them on their cell phones and they're on social media and those kind of things. That is a form of that, isn't it?
Certainly, you really hit it there. You don't like it, and yet you're doing it. Same here, for sure. I oftentimes joke that Steve Bannon turned me into a cyborg so that I could bitch about technology, and it's true. I think it should be curious to most people why something that's so unpleasant is so prevalent and freely chosen. But yeah, I agree. In fact, I would, a lot of my study was in paleoanthropology and cultural evolution, the idea that culture evolves in similar ways to biological forms. Not the same, but similar, and that culture and biology co-evolve, so that these kind of leaps in human biological evolution coincide with leaps in technological evolution or cultural evolution. So the process has been ongoing since the first campfires, first spears, first cave paintings, first clothes. They really, and the fire may have been one of the most radical. You look at the human digestive tract compared to our closest cousins, the chimpanzees, and the chimpanzees have a much hardier gut, much hardier stomach than human beings. Human beings have basically the same length of intestine, but a much smaller stomach. And the reason being, from an evolutionary standpoint, the ability to cook food, to kind of pre-digest food, allows for that. And it basically, humans just, the efficiency of evolution, human stomachs began to atrophy. They were no longer needed, the hardy gut. So yes, human beings have been coupled with technology from the beginning. The question is, how fast are we going to go there, and how desirable is it? I mean, there are a number.
Yeah, you guys are already picking up some. I believe so. Joe Allen, if we go back to the Dark Aeon, I was looking at his other authors. It says that he holds a master's degree from Boston University, where he studied cognitive science, human evolution as they pertain to religion. So, cog sci, understanding of the utility of religion and human evolution. Now, he presents himself in this interview as Christian. Again, doesn't really define exactly what it is, and certainly presents himself as Christian in the book. But it does appear that he does believe in macro Darwinian theory of evolution. And again, I'll highlight here that you guys heard me say this 1,000 times, so forgive me. But natural selection, or speciation rather, speciation is not the same thing as macroevolution, and that from a theistic creator, intelligent design, and that is another one of these inversions, right? Remember earlier I was talking about these Christian inversions of transhumanism. Intelligent design is another one, whereas we Christians believe that God intelligently designed creation. The transhumanists want to intelligently redesign creation through technology. But he says a few things where it sounds like he is in favor of a sort of macro Darwinian theory, which me as an Orthodox Christian, I believe in speciation. I certainly do not believe in macroevolution. I think that it's logically flawed. And I think that most people, even in the hard sciences, are coming to a point in which it's just not adding up.
A number of ways in which biology and technology have co-evolved that have left human beings pretty weak. And I think that to the extent that we're in a transhuman age where the direction of evolution will be determined by human decisions and human intellect and thought and intuition and worldviews, we will have some really big choices in the coming century or centuries. And I think that people are going to choose different things. So, I'm not a universalist. I don't believe in, people oftentimes ask, what are we going to do? I mean, who's we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things, I talk about a lot with my business partners, actually talk about a lot just in general. We're talking about what leadership is. And I say, what is leadership today? And Dedrick, my business partner, said, leadership is the algorithm, because the algorithm's really showing us how it thinks we're supposed to think, or whoever's controlling and pulling the strings of the algorithm is feeding us specific messages. And depending on what echo chamber that you're in, you're being fed a specific thing that's causes a lot of confirmation bias. What do you think the power of the algorithm is right now on how we're acting in society?
Profound. There's a concept.
Guys, I do this just so we can get through these. I know, shout out Tom. He does, maybe it's a joke. He doesn't actually speak this fast. It's just a way. I watch everything on like 1.5, 1.75. That's just how I do it. So this is at 1.25. This video is sped up. But that's just so we're already an hour and a half in. This is an hour 44-minute conversation. At 1.25, we should be able to get through it in a little over an hour. So that is, if you're hearing him talk fast, it's because it's sped up. It's not necessarily him, but I don't think it's that. I mean, I could be, my senses may be off because I listen to stuff so sped up that I'm so used to it. So maybe for other people, it does sound like it's a lot coming at you, but that is just FYI, just so everybody knows. So shout out, Tom. Just one low, everybody to know it's sped up at 1.25 so we can get through it quicker. All right, you wouldn't believe how many comments I got on the Nathan Reynolds video, the guy who claimed to grow up in the sort of satanic elite family that I did. What was that, 2 weeks ago? How many people were so upset that video was sped up at 1.25 and it was 3 hours long? Anyways,
comes up a lot in the conversations around technology, especially technocracy, rule by expert, and more recently, rule by experts who deploy technologies to control society below them for their own good, right? For our own good. And also transhumanism, the concept of algocracy, rule by algorithm, the idea that the algorithm, in fact, is superior to human decision-making. It's oftentimes described in terms of partnership or symbiosis, that the superior human is the symbiote with the algorithm or with the AI. But ultimately, myself, I see it as very much an unwanted intrusion upon a process that, a very human process that's still ongoing, in which the human species and human individuals are trying to improve themselves, right? Trying to improve their decision-making, trying to improve society, trying to refine their worldviews. The introduction of the algorithm, and you can see it already, how rapidly the proportion of human decision-making to algorithmic decision-making, or human computation, human information processing, compared to the algorithmic processing, the algorithm is eating up more and more and more of that proportion. A lot of cognitive scientists or neuroscientists who really don't believe in free will, they think that free will is basically the output of a biochemical process that's completely out of our hands, kind of an illusion. You hear people like Daniel Kahneman talking like this, Daniel Dennett, Yuval Noah Harari takes his ideas from them. And one of the proposals is that the algorithm, because it's much faster than human decision-making, it's more accurate than human decision-making, and since human beings aren't really even making the decisions anyway, to merge with the algorithm, to become symbiotic with the algorithm, so that the algorithm is actually the primary driver of decision-making. That's their desire. I see it more in terms of the creation of a kind of digital control grid, in which the people who are deploying the algorithms, and to some extent even the more complex neural networks, the AI itself, is in control, and the human being is just along for the ride. The famous transhumanist Anders Sandberg described it when just discussing the negative views of technology, but it really struck me at the time. I've used it many times since. Described some of the fears around technology going back to the Victorian era, that human beings would atrophy as we coupled with the technologies. We become more parasitic than symbiotic. And it was described then in the Victorian era as human beings becoming like barnacles on a ship hull. And I think that, again, it's not going to be the same across the board. Some symbiosis will be more like, say, moss or lichen. That there will be much more of a partnership. And some, I think some communities will resist it to the point that it's just they're left relatively unscathed. Although I expect they will be a smaller number and probably disempowered. But yeah, the algorithm, the algocracy, an algorithmic society, we already live in it. And yeah, I find it to be aesthetically unappealing, and then coming from out of that, I justify it with philosophy that is philosophically unsound, or again, just undesirable.
Well, we're talking about free will, and when we're talking about an algorithm, let's say specifically on social media that's programming people, I don't think most people even know that it's happening. And so, we really don't have free will to go against that. At least most people don't, because they don't know. And I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately. What can we do to keep down the programming in society? What can we do to, not brainwash people without them knowing? And, one interesting thing I think Congress could do when setting the laws is to, one, put a warning on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They need to get rid of TikTok, in my opinion. We can talk about that here in a minute. But and just have people's feed in the order of what people post that they follow, rather than being sent something meant to give a dopamine hit, which is actually making people addicts without knowing that they're becoming addicts to that, and would give us specific pecking order to where it's not programming. I know that sounds like we're interfering in business, but I feel like when we interfere in business, or rather when a business is doing something without the customer knowing, that is having a horrible effect on the world. It's really just protecting the citizens. What do you think about that thought?
Well, first you'd have to get the acknowledgement that it's bad, that it's undesirable, or that it's wrong, that it's harmful. More and more people come forward with in Congress, you even hear people talking about this a lot. Josh Hawley, Ro Khanna, a number of people in Congress speak about this, about the deterioration of society due to social media. So it's there, but it's also not exactly, it's not something that's taken for granted. And in fact, all of these politicians rely on that algorithmic system for their existence, as do the businesses that contribute to their campaigns. And as does the government itself in its analysis and tracking of its own affairs. So, yes, I mean, I agree, and I also think that would be better. You know, it's interesting. A lot of people aren't aware of this because they see so much of the transhumanist elements or post-humanist elements, the kind of man-machine merger ideas in the World Economic Forum, right? With you know, Klaus Schwab talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Yuval Harari talking about Homo Deus. You've got Kai-Fu Lee talking about AI 2041 when we finally merge. All these characters there speak about this great technological convergence, and so people don't realize how much of the policy proposals coming out of the World Economic Forum, how many of them really focus on the kind of quasi-socialist policies to reduce harm. And I think that a radical libertarian or an accelerationist, like someone like Mark Andreessen, would probably say, or Peter Thiel would say, that you're doing a socialism on us. I agree, though. I think that to the extent that any product is doing obvious harm, it should be reined in a warning system or a relaxation of the intense algorithmic processes to feed somebody what they want to hear, to basically cultivate a dopamine hit addiction. It's all negative, but it's going to be very, very complicated going forward. California would probably be the first place to do it, oddly enough, just due to, you see all the safetyism there. Even though it's the home of Silicon Valley, or maybe New York. Idaho would be the last, even though that's probably the most Luddite place, just due to the kind of political tendency towards big government.
There's a great comment here. Baklava 33 says they have technology to erase the mind, I believe. Well, and I mentioned this before, there's a general thesis and the history of technology is that the Industrial Revolution was meant to replace the physical body so that labor could be increased. And others have said, and I also agree, is that digital technologies are replacing the human brain. It's replacing the mind. It's creating a collective hive mind. And that's really what the AI system is. And transhumanism is about merging with that collective hive mind. So I agree with you, Baklava.
Government, heavy-handed government, not. But it is a solution, and it's something to argue about. And I think that's also really, really important because there's not enough of that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's kind of being swept under the rug. You mentioned some people that are actually talking about it, which is good. But, I found it interesting, and I love Rand Paul, but I found it interesting that he was absolutely against the TikTok ban. But when you have a Chinese entity, the Chinese government feeding your children algorithms, that seems like a threat to the country because it's programming the kid's mind in a way to think like the Chinese government wants them to think. What's your kind of view on that?
I agree completely. It's, you've got the two elements. You've got the surveillance element, which is right in your face, including biometric surveillance. And then you have the manipulation, the psychological manipulation, the algorithmic cultivation of certain mindsets. And TikTok, it's been noted many times, TikTok's parent company ByteDance has a different TikTok. I can't remember the name, Chinese name, in China. And the algorithms tend to feed Chinese children educational content,
Sure.
uplifting content. China, in fact, restricts how long children can be online, recognizing those negative effects, even as they're pumping American children full of it and European children across the world. It's well known, and yet somehow, I think probably largely due to political commitments, a political philosophy of libertarianism or pro-business, but also probably a lot of money that's either directly or indirectly coming from China. But TikTok is probably the most ingenious social media algorithm because of its addictive nature and because of its ability to kind of sense and detect what someone's taste is and feed them that. But that's also the reason it should be, I agree, it should be banned completely.
Yeah, it's interesting when I've made some of these points and, we run clips online, the comments are like, you just don't want people to know the truth. And it's, you want people, you don't want people to be free and information to be, shared easily. And I found it interesting because when we went on TikTok, and we posted specific clips, 3 of the first 5 clips were taken down. And,
what were they on?
Well, one was on propaganda and how it's worked over the years.
Wow.
The other one was on kind of the end of different civilizations.
Mm.
And I forget what the third one was.
They took it down
within 24 hours.
Wow.
And I can show you the screenshots because this is like 2 weeks ago. I haven't been on TikTok. Actually, I'm personally not on TikTok. You know, they put the show on TikTok now. And yeah, the first like 3 of the first 5 were taken down. And they were all like, let's say pro-masculine, you know, Christian values, nothing really I mean, it wasn't controversial. I wasn't talking about trans issues or anything like that, which I would like to in the future and have it on there just to give my free speech a shot to see if people align with it. But no, they took it down.
That actually surprises me a lot, but not because, just because it is, you know, TikTok, I don't use it, so I'm not familiar with it directly, but TikTok, a lot of the guys on the right, even guys, like maybe you would call them far right, that's kind of a bad buzzword, but they note how a lot of the things that would be pulled immediately off of Facebook or Twitter pre-Musk, Google also would limit the search for it. Things like the January 6th Capitol riots, the various arguments in and around COVID and COVID treatment, COVID policy, those would by and large remain up at TikTok while they were being taken down by American companies. And so that's a lot of the basis for that argument. But you also think about it in terms of Chinese interests.
Yes.
They have every reason to want both strict COVID policies in America to suppress economic prosperity and various other things. And then also they're going to want to foment rebellion against it. So,
and this is one of a point in which I've also had multiple videos that I've posted on my Instagram banned on TikTok, some of them being explicitly pro-masculine. So it's very interesting to see which, and you can't appeal, you don't hear anything back. But to the point that Joe was making also on TikTok, if you've seen some of the AI translation of Mean Mr. Mustache Man and some of his speeches, that whole mimetic process has been catalyzed by TikTok because it's being banned on all the American social media platforms. So X and TikTok were the only ones where his speeches were being translated by AI into English. And also, if you remember, I think it was a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, when there was a meme that was going viral about Osama bin Laden and his relationship to the CIA and America and all this different stuff, and his the letter that he wrote explaining why they're doing what they're doing, that was banned by all the social media companies except for TikTok. So I don't know, until I believe the U.S. government then pressured TikTok and they then banned all the Osama bin Laden stuff. So it is interesting what they allow and what they don't allow. Anything that kind of causes internal division, and sometimes we want that division, they allow. But it is very interesting how Christianity and masculinity are things that TikTok actually suppresses, which makes sense because China is promoting masculinity. They're limiting how much tablet time or social media time children can have in China. They're very well aware of the negative consequences of technology and social media, and they limit that. And meanwhile, they also, it seems like TikTok almost limits positive things that may help the West, like, again, discussions on masculinity and Christianity. So very interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking when I heard those. I was like, it would benefit the Chinese government to have people upset about COVID, and it would benefit the Chinese government to push a rebellion against the United States government. So what were the clip? What was the third clip, Warren? Do you remember what it was? Yes.
That's wild.
Yes.
That one of all things.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah. 3 of the first 5. And they were going viral too. I mean, it was with, I remember seeing you sent me the screenshot, and we'd gotten, 80,000+ views in a very short amount of time. And yeah, they clipped it. We appealed it. They haven't responded. They said one was misinformation. Forget the other one. Forget what exactly they said, but it was something about we went against their terms of condition. Whatever their terms were. So who knows?
Abramovich is interesting. If we can linger on her for just one sec, you've probably seen the HoloLens, the Microsoft HoloLens advertisement that came out on Good Friday 2020, or at least it was posted publicly on Good Friday 2020. So as everyone was locked down and churches were shuttered, Microsoft, in partnership with Christie's, the auction house, released an advertisement for a mixed reality art exhibit by Marina Abramovich. And it was corny and tacky. You had all these hipsters wearing Microsoft HoloLens augmented reality glasses, and they had the O mouths, and with latte encrusted around them, those types. And they're looking at this empty space, and suddenly Marina Abramovich manifests in a red dress, and it's creepy and it's weird. But she's talking about, the title of the installation is The Life. and she's talking about how the art of the future would be pure transmission of energy, and that the what was that? Yeah, that after death, what remains is the art, and in this state, in this digital state, I am made immortal. So very transhuman in its orientation, and of course, you see the transhumanist and posthumanist elements in Lady Gaga, who is a protege of hers, and even maybe to some extent Jay-Z, although probably a stretch there.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy too is she was just named what is it, she's going to be in charge of the schools in Ukraine.
Yeah.
What was it? She was just named ambassador to Ukraine, but she's going to be in charge of the schools. What is a woman like that going to do for children in Ukraine, and why is she getting put in that position?
She's going to pervert and dement them.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. Did you ever see the Balenciaga stuff that went viral?
Mm-hmm.
That was me that started that shit.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it got a little nerve wracking. A lot of praying for me, because I mean, I really did feel like there was some dark forces, coming after me at the time, and weird messages, crazy dreams,
right.
But when that went viral, I thought that there's no way they could align with Balenciaga after that. Then, of course, 2 months later, 24-hour news cycle, like it's a forgotten thing.
Yeah.
But what do you think about companies like Balenciaga? Because they're actually kind of pushing that same thing. A lot of their stuff is transhuman.
I think it's very complicated because it raises some really difficult questions about what freedom means in America. Whether you have the freedom to suppress certain forms of culture. And obviously we do have the freedom to suppress the most extreme forms, right? Child abuse, which Balenciaga is, in my opinion, guilty of, or at least alluding to it. But child abuse, drug abuse, defacement and disrespect towards certain protected groups, right? All that we've all agreed, or at least many have agreed, that those face legal sanction and banning, or at least suppression and marginalization. So it really raises the question, do cities have the right to say, I don't want any of that in my city? Or do states? Does the country itself? In my opinion, if I were king, if I were mayor or governor or king of the world, yeah, you would at least push that off into the fringes.
Sure.
Make it like the brothels of old. But one of the really wild developments out of Balenciaga, in my opinion, was Kanye West, right, or Ye or Ye or whatever you're supposed to call him now, and he's transnemic. His name has shifted. But it was right around that time, maybe exactly at that time, that he's running around in that weird Balenciaga sock on his head. And it was after his outburst about going DEFCON, what is it, 3? I can never remember. I'm not a military guy. DEFCON 3 on the Jews and all that sort of stuff. And appearing on Alex Jones and saying lots of really wacky stuff, and the fishnet and the Yahoo or Yoo-hoo net and Yoo-hoo. But the fact that was Balenciaga, and the fact that Ye or Ye or Kanye was very vocal about the negative impacts of Instagram on women and turning them into promiscuous sluts. And he's running around with that conservative kid that doesn't believe in dinosaurs, whatever his name is, or the Holocaust either. And it was a weird juxtaposition. I called it MAGA MK Ultra, because it really is what it looked like. It just looked like some sort of bizarre psychological operation cooked up by somebody to muddy the waters and confuse people. But the fact that he was wearing that Balenciaga sock on his head, and the fact that he openly defended Balenciaga and said the Instagram's worse, it just shows what kind of cultural chaos we live in. And I see something, and I'm getting the sense that perhaps you would see something the same, that out of all this chaos, there is a new order forming, but it's a very dark order.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a problem I have with the algorithm, because you're talking about putting Satanism and evil to the fringes, which I agree with, but the algorithm's pushing it to the forefront and acting like it's normal and okay. And it's convincing people that anybody who thinks against that is not normal and okay. And when you and I both know those people are crazy, and they're really pushing a crazy agenda, yet the media, yet the algorithm is saying, no, we're crazy. And it's flipping truth on its head and making a lot of people afraid to speak out, or afraid to look dumb. I don't really care at this point, but I think that's really what we're seeing, with that algorithm on social media.
Yeah, it's an inversion within an inversion within an inversion, I oftentimes think of it like the Hindus and the reality as a physical reality anyway being illusion, and it really is as if the physical illusion is now developing physical or digital illusions within that, and then psychological illusions within that. It's psychotic turtles all the way down.
And that is a really good point, that what the media is doing in the world that we live in now, this information age, really is that people are operating not based on reality. This is where we get the transgender movement and all types of craziness, furries, is that people are being conditioned to live in a sort of cognitive fantasy realm through, again, they're being inundated. So they think they're on reality and they're on their phone or they're on their computer and they're engaging in all these apps, but really it's divorcing them further from reality. At least the progressive ethos, the meta narrative that dominates the Western civilization right now, it really is. It's not just anti-human, it's anti-realism. And it's in favor of people living in these sort of fictional fantasy realms, which I would include transhumanism, one of those as well.
I mean, what do you think about Elon Musk right now? Because he's doing what he's done with Twitter, which I think is a good thing. Allowing more free speech. But in the back of my head, he's thinking about putting a Neuralink in the back of my head, right? Yep. And in 10 years or so, or however long they're doing. I think they had a first human in a clinical trial here recently. What's kind of your thought on what he's doing and his ideas?
We hit Musk hard at the War Room. Steve is really adamant about not elevating Musk as some sort of hero. Steve's met him. He knows him to some extent. They've passed jabs back and forth at each other.
And where Joe Allen's getting ready to go right now in the conversation of Elon Musk, I really appreciate this and appreciate that dimension in his book, because he really hammers Musk multiple times as a sort of false salvific figure, because his entire ethos and the companies that he's created in his partnership with the government really is tied towards a transhumanist future in which we are spacefaring entities. And so this idea that, he's giving lip service to conservative culture, Christianity, this is kind of lukewarm. And he's getting ready to mention about the Satan's champion Halloween suit that he wore 2 years ago. And so I did a whole stream on Elon Musk is not your friend. And that was right during the conversation where he was going to purchase X. And so I'm pretty happy with how that podcast, that stream has withstood the test of time. So feel free to check that out later. If you guys are looking, if you need a content void, check out my stream on why Elon Musk is not your friend.
Via the media. And I cover Musk pretty extensively in the book, especially in light of Yuval Noah Harari. I think that Musk is like all these characters. I don't think about these people like comic book superheroes and comic book supervillains, even though Musk cultivates that sort of persona publicly. But I do see him having it to the extent that we see technocracy, transhumanism, posthumanism, long-termism, all these as dangerous or potentially devastating ideas. Musk is without a doubt the most prominent advocate for all of them. Maybe more importantly, Musk is actually making these ideas possible. The realization of these technologies are happening, due to his wealth, connections, and companies. You start with, oftentimes when I describe it, you start with XAI, the creation of a digital mind superior to a human being, Neuralink, in order to attach brains. He proposes hundreds of millions or billions of brains connected to that AI system and, of course, to each other in a sort of hive mind in order to better survive, right, to push forward human evolution. Then you have his robotics project with Optimus, the humanoid robot, to take care of all the drudge work and the labor that blue-collar people do now. And this proposal for radical abundance, wherein the last job will be programming AI, and then eventually AI will program itself. He declared that 2019 at the World Artificial Intelligence Summit in Shanghai, China, arguing with Jack Ma. And the entire concept of having highways dominated by or exclusively covered in, that's not the right word, but you exclusively have autonomous vehicles or primarily autonomous vehicles. I mean, it sounds great in theory if you like to read or make out with your girlfriend in the car while it drives itself. But I mean, your freedom of movement is going to be immediately curtailed if the person with the master switch, be it the corporation or the government or both, decides that's it for you. Like
and this is one of the points that I made in my stream that I said Elon Musk is not your friend, is talking about how the reason why the purchase of Twitter is, free speech and all this different things. And again, it's not to say that I'm not happy with the shifting of the Overton window with X.com. I absolutely am. But one of the points that I make in that stream is if Musk is interested in XAI, which he's developed, Neuralink, SpaceX, all the Tesla and all these autonomous robots and AI systems, dominating and controlling, or at least giving access to more speech on a platform in which you are digitally tracking every single post, every single thing that somebody looks at. It's all being documented by AI, and you're naive if you don't think that's what's occurring behind the curtains at X. That's partly why he can do away with half the staff or 80% of the staff, because what's filling that labor void, obviously not so much the censorship, although I'm still censored on X. I'll digress. It has to do with the amalgamation of all that information to put in one place so that the AI can track it. It can track global discourse. It can see what's the hot topics in China, what's the hot things in America, what's the hot things in Brazil. And it's putting this into algorithms, it's putting this into code so that when he wants to fuse, as he said, millions, if not billions of minds to XAI, that AI system, especially a language-based model, is going to be so much more advanced than just coming through Wikipedia articles and public things that are, blog posts, public published items on the internet. It's going through an uncensored and unfettered, at least to some degree, conversation of global discourse, all being tracked by an AI system. And I think that's a huge reason for why he bought it. It's not just so that Donald Trump can become president in 2024. That might be part of the progress. And that's where like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Mark Andreessen, these are all people that are quote unquote transhumanists and are quote unquote Republicans at this point, but they all have the same transhumanist future. And that is one that nullifies human labor, turns it into a global hive mind, and we will be forced to merge with the machine if we want to survive in the world to come.
The trucker's convoy, something like that. And on down. I mean, this whole dream of going into space, I hate to sound like the radical lefties of the 60s and 70s when they're griping about, the white man's going to space while we're suffering down here. But I would say that I feel more like that than I do excited about people going out to, kick around on some dead rocks out in the solar system and maybe bring back some ore. I'm just not excited about it. And I think it's maybe even an impossible dream anyway. So the entire worldview that Elon Musk stands for does not appeal to me. And I'm not going to try to portray him as some sort of evil villain, but I will say in closing on Musk that it was very curious to me on Halloween, must have been Halloween of 2022, right when he bought Twitter. He shows up in that Devil's Champion Halloween outfit, and it was put all over the media. And it has it was actually a ram head, but it resembles the goat head of the Baphomet, and with an upside down cross emblazoned on it, and then of course the same on the what do you call them, gauntlets or bracers on the arms. And it was really weird to me because Elon Musk has courted the right so much, and so many people whom I respect just adore Elon Musk. And I can understand if you are an atheistic right winger why you would see Elon Musk as a good guy or a guy on your side, but I cannot understand the millions upon millions of Christian conservatives who turn a blind eye to that sort of thing. Because, people oftentimes are like, it's just a Halloween costume, man. Well, he used it in his Twitter profile pic until just very, very recently when he changed the name to X. That sort of thing, I'm not trying to paint some sort of picture of a secret Illuminati in which Musk is employed to bring the right into Satanism. But in effect, perhaps in a kind of complex adaptive system sort of way, that's exactly what's happening, at least on a symbolic level.
Well, that's some of the points that I've made in the past is that, I like what he's doing when it comes to Twitter and free speech. I like how he stands up against the radical left and those type of things. But if I were trying to take over the world and put a chip in everybody's brain, and let's say I had evil intentions, let's say, I'm not saying he does, but let's just say that he did. I would want to court the right, because you have the Christians on the right for the most part. You have the group that has more values, more shared values within. It's very close to family, and knowing that you can always go back to the left, but if you got the right on your side to begin with, it's a way to build a bridge in the future. And it would be a good plan if that were his intention. I don't know that it is. I do like a lot of the stuff that he's saying. And the other side of it is, if we're barreling down towards transhumanism, whether we like it or not, do we want somebody that's kind of, I'm not going to say in charge, but at the top, that seemingly at least has certain shared values, that seemingly likes freedom of speech, that seemingly wants to fight against the radical left? What do you think about that question?
It's better than the alternative, just a homogenous block of left-wing techno-fetishists taking over the world. But honestly, as far as the political spectrum goes, I think that it's been described that in America, there's the red tribe, the blue tribe, and the gray tribe. The gray tribe being technologists, Silicon Valley. And they don't really fit clearly in either. It's mostly libertarian, but they don't really fit in that. But to the extent that you can pinpoint most transhumanists, they tend to be libertarian. They tend to be on the right. They tend to be for personal freedom because they're, mostly billionaires who want to be able to create whatever technology and deploy it without anybody getting in their way. That would be Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen. Musk is very much on that wavelength. Sam Altman, as lefty as he is in some ways, Sam Altman's very much like that too. Then among the actual transhumanist ideologues, Max Moore, who coined transhumanism, at least in the context of as we use it now, Max Moore is very much libertarian and is completely averse to the proposals at the World Economic Forum, for instance. He was very angry at me, or he let me know that he did not appreciate being in the same book as a lot of those characters, or at least that I didn't make a clear distinction between him and them. And in retrospect, I probably should have, even if it doesn't mean that I agree with him. So as far as it goes, those who want economic freedom and personal freedom and morphological freedom, as they say, that's most of the people who are developing these technologies, who own these companies. That's most of them. And then insofar, if the we, right, if the we is Christians, if we are the traditionalist West, interestingly enough, a lot of these guys have, like underneath them, you have all of these pro-technology Christians, everything from evangelicals to, you even have the Vatican talking about how to harness AI in ethical ways that it doesn't do harm. In fact, the first conference that the Vatican had in person after the pandemic was on artificial intelligence, a massive conference, multiple days. So I guess the way I see it is like this, if you just separate out all of the ideological elements just temporarily and just look at it in terms of the technologies themselves and the inherent shifts in values or inherent shifts in life paths or civilizational paths and the way we live and what is at the forefront of our attention at any given moment, and how children are reared, how children are even conceived, how we die, all these sorts of really important questions. Technology is somewhat politically neutral in that fashion, somewhat. And so if we're rocketing towards a singularity in which artificial intelligence is destined to become more intelligent than human beings and more capable, if we're rocketing towards a future in which you have no clear distinction between human and machine, in some way, it really doesn't matter if you've got libertarians, right-wingers, even conservative Christians leading that charge, or if you have, Fruit Loop leftists and liberals and communists doing it. It will change the flavor of it, obviously. But in the end, what they're talking about is not a world in which they program this machine. Now, this is the narrative. I'm not saying this is necessarily how they actually think about it, but the narrative is that the machine itself will come to make its own decisions. All we do, Musk says this regularly, all we can do is guide it, kind of like you're raising a child.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm not really optimistic about Musk or Thiel. I actually think Thiel is a more interesting character in many ways, but I don't think that a future, to the extent we put our future in their hands and our civilizational orientation in their hands, we are entering a dark eon, as it were.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we're moving so fast. I don't think most people even realize kind of what's going on. Even the ones that are at the top, they don't understand what's going on. They say they don't know how the AI comes up with what it comes up with.
Mm-hmm.
We're training some different systems right now for cancer diagnostics, and it's not known how exactly it works. I know that we need about 500,000 images to train this AI, and I want to get to that point for the solid tumors, but the bigger impacts across the world. It's like I do ask the question, are we doing the right thing? Which I do believe we are for cancer, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that do you think it's an all or nothing? Like you can't at all have any type of AI, or you can't where do you think the line is that we shouldn't cross?
Like I say, who's we?
Good question. So I guess all of society right now, like is from a world standpoint, the entire world, because ultimately, what they want is a one world government. That's coming. So I guess let's say that I'm not for that, which I'm not. I'm on the side that would want to fight against that, but I also think that some AI is good. I mean, is that because you study this a lot more than I have, obviously? Is that online with how you're thinking, or is it a different idea?
And this is where I would point out for Joe Allen, at least from an Orthodox perspective, we don't view technology as evil in and of itself, because evil necessitates a will, right? So technology is not sentient. Technology does not have a will. Technology is not made in the image of God. Joe Allen does it. He kind of mentions at the ambiguity of technology here, but he doesn't state again, if you, because the whole book is premised as a sort of conversation between Christianity and understandings of the Antichrist, Revelation, the end times, the beast system, in relationship to transhumanism and their ultimate goals. But this is where it would be important, and this is where even recent saints, again, refer back to the eschatological visions of the blessed, that when I covered the book by the Eschaton Vigil, looking at some of the prophecies put forward by saints and elders, is that technology and Metropolitan Neophytos of Morpheus talked about, and St. Paisios mentioned to him that it was the computer, it was going to be the internet, it was going to be technology that was going to allow the proliferation and the spread of orthodoxy for the first time around the world, which we see happening. We see that according to Dyer, it was like American Orthodoxy went from like 700,000, 800,000 people to 7 million since 2020. That's an unprecedented rise in any religious orientation, especially Eastern Orthodox Christianity. So technology isn't evil in and of itself, but getting at the power of advanced artificial intelligence and cyborgs and brain implants and all this different stuff, it's moving us towards a way in which human fallen will, or even the influence of demons and Satan possessing people, which if the elites are participating in nefarious rituals for the attainment of world power, it would make sense that then they, through the centralization and the power of technology and censorship and all these different things, they will be able to exert their demonic will, whether it be their own or being possessed by an entity, through the technology. And so this is where I wish Joe Allen, if he really was rooted within Christian theology and not coming at it from a cogsci evolutionary understanding of religion and Christianity, I think that it'd be a little bit more powerful. But here you're about to hear his response to the ambiguity of technology.
Yeah, like I said, there'll be very, very different approaches to this. If there's good reasons not to make me king even for a day, but if I were, I would certainly ban any AI being created that was above human level intelligence. In fact, I think that if I had my way about it, civilization, or at least sub-civilizations, subcultures that I have any impact on, would minimize it and treat it as if it were radioactive, or treat it as if you were summoning demons, you know. And if we have to summon the demon to do our will, then you have to be sure to do it in a specific way and to banish it and keep it banished most of the time. But that's not what's happening. Yeah, you know, the health.
Well, I would argue, and in a way, I've written this in my paper, that transhumanism really does share many attributes with theurgic practices. Theurgy is about the sort of contacting and the manipulation or the utilization of demons and spirits for the fulfillment of one's will. And there's even discussion, and there's multiple ways in which academics have, I didn't come up with this idea. I was actually referencing an article written by another academic highlighting how this naturalistic God, which the transhumanists sort of frame the AI God as, it's a natural God. It's a power that's already present within nature itself. And they're creating the technology to harness the intelligence of the universe, that this naturalistic God really is being theurgically conjured through the technology to fulfill the ends in which they desire. So he does make reference that he does believe that the transhumanist agenda and the utilization of this technology does have potentially a black magic element. And I would say that you can, even from academic lens, without, again, getting into conspiracy theories, you can make a philosophical, theological connection with theurgy and transhumanism, which I've also done. And somebody in the chat was highlighting that they believe AI could take over, or Satan could take over an artificial intelligence. And that is my personal opinion, that what they're building and the technological structures and the AI and all this stuff, it really is what I refer to as the cybernetic skeleton of Satan. Cybernetics has to do with these technological feedback loops, divorced from sort of human agency of information, communication, this type of stuff. And in a way, what's happening is another inversion of the incarnation. Now, I don't believe AI can become sentient, but I do believe through, again, you read books like the Asclepius, the Hermetic Corpus, where Hermes is teaching Asclepius how to imbue what they call daemons, or what we would refer to as demons, within statues, so that statues could be animated and talk back and answer questions. And that's ultimately what the advanced artificial intelligence is. It is the conjuration of the ultimate daemon within an entity, so that you can answer, you can have access to sort of transcendent knowledge by a conversation with this thing. So I think that ultimately where this stuff is going is that the AI is never going to become sentient. We're never going to Mars. We're never exploring space. I believe Christ will come back before then. And I believe ultimately the culmination of this transhumanist agenda will end with Satan and the demons somehow imbuing themselves, whether it be through explicit rituals or not. I wouldn't be surprised if people at the highest levels actually participate in conjuration magic and ritual magic, but that the evil one it's the inversion of the incarnation, and it's almost the necessity for the Antichrist to come, the person who stands in place of Christ, and that the Messiah, the Antichrist, will be somebody who's fully hooked up to this. They will be the first fully transhumanist entity that will be perceived to be able to perform miracles and have knowledge of different events happening all over the world. So that is my personal opinion, coming at it from an Orthodox Christian perspective. But just wanted to say that to resonate with somebody in the live chat that was pointing at the same thing.
Healthcare aspect is one of the trickiest, because what kind of monster says if you're able to train a system on 500 or thousands of cancer images, and now you have an AI that can readily understand a radiology image and much better than a human, which they do. Probably your system can recognize the beginnings of a tumor much more readily than a human eye. You can't use it because it's AI, because it's black magic. Even if I believe that, which to some extent I actually do, without going into all that, there's no secular argument against it. And we live in a secular society in which reason must be employed and evidence must be employed before you begin legislating something away. Same with the Neuralink, or any of the other brain-computer interfaces that are already in people's heads. Musk is very late to the game. Thiel beat him to that with BlackRock Neurotech, and a smaller company, Synchron, under Tom Oxley. They've also beat Musk to it. So in all of those cases, the people who already have advanced brain-computer interfaces are people who've been locked in, either from a stroke, or oftentimes it's ALS, or various, just injuries, paralysis. And so what, you've got somebody who's a vegetable, they can't communicate. Are you going to say they can't develop brain computer interfaces for those people? They just have to lay in the bed and they can never communicate.
Right.
It's a modern miracle.
Yeah.
A really close friend of mine, when we were younger, his mother was in a horrible car accident, and she lived for probably 4 or 5 years, and, but was not able to communicate. And, I would have given anything to see him be able to speak to her through something like a brain implant like that. So what are you going to do? But the underlying philosophy of transhumanism, and I'm using Max Moore, sorry, Max, but it is a great blanket term. But one of the key principles is from healing to enhancement. And so all of these medical projects are just initial phases for what will eventually be used for just total enhancement of the human being.
I've been looking at AI as in, which we do with all of our healthcare and diagnostics, is, how can we do something better than the current system and turn it upside down and shake it? But I also have some, I have a lot of questions that you're talking about too, because I want to do the right thing for the world, not just, like, let's say that we cure cancer. I mean, that's a big one, obviously. I'm sure we've all had family members or friends that have passed away of cancer. And, if we can harness that to make a big difference, but I also don't want to ruin the world by doing that either.
Well, there's a lot of others, so you're not going to hurt too bad. It would be like if you had decided to become a heroin dealer. Unless you take over the whole market, you just be one. But this is obviously and I don't mean to diminish it, because it's very, very different. And it is again, if my grandfather could have been, he was at the end of his life, but if he could have been cured of cancer like that, would I not want that to happen? Of course.
Yeah.
And certainly he would have, even if he was, reconciled to his death. Yeah, it's very, very difficult. I come back a lot to just religious philosophy. There are a lot of ways to think about the material in relation to the spiritual, to the extent that a religious philosophy separates the two at all. But to the extent that one does, and Jesus makes it pretty clear, right? My kingdom is not of this world. Don't fear those who come to kill the body, but those who are going to kill the soul. Don't bury your treasure on earth, but rather in heaven. There's that dualism is implicit in what Jesus is saying. It raises a lot of interesting questions.
I agree with him here, but this is where, again, I think some of the inconsistencies in his own theology is that Christianity is one of the only religions to fully explicate and sanctify the human body. So yes, Christ is telling us, don't fear those who can come and destroy the human body. Absolutely, because we will, God willing, we make it to the resurrection, make it to the kingdom, we'll have a perfect spiritual body. But Christianity is not dualistic in regards to the body and the mind, or the body and the spiritual, because of the hylomorphic anthropology in which the soul gives rise and form to the body. This is essential to our worldview. And this is a point in which I would argue that maybe some of his Christian theology isn't fully explicated, or isn't even fully rooted within a traditional worldview that can kind of make sense of transhuman. I would argue transhumanism is much, much more dualistic in its relationship to the physical and the sort of mental, because really it's all about mental abstract concepts, and that the AI and the algorithms will be able to harness and process that information much more abundantly than the human mind.
Questions. What is the meaning of death? How should we approach death? How should we approach illness? What did Jesus do throughout his ministry? Heal people. If we are not able to heal people in the same way that Jesus did without sophisticated instruments, then should we not develop those instruments? But if those instruments also have correlates that will accomplish other things, then is that initial benefit ultimately leading to something horrific, even if it's not totalitarian, even if it's totally free, and it becomes the human as we are now, the human as image of God becomes a very, very, very different image due to the free proliferation of these technologies. It's very, very tough. I drove here and I walked in with boots talking into a microphone. Yeah. These are very, very difficult questions. And that's why, to me, the we question, I think that really has to be qualified. Who is we?
Yeah, no, that's good. You're reminding me to pray about this a lot more, specifically because, I think about it. I don't really pray about it, and, maybe have God guide me a little more specifically on this. I mean, what's your thoughts on like next generation sequencing and, for instance, we're doing something called optical genome mapping, where we map the genome. What's your thoughts on those type of technologies?
Everything from genome sequencing to, I'm sure you've seen the really incredible protein modeling. AlphaFold out of DeepMind was the first big story, but a lot of other people are doing it. Meta, Salesforce. And then, of course, the modeling of biological systems, modeling the human body, modeling ecosystems, modeling the cosmos. It would be impossible. We'd never understand the relationship of stars within galaxies, the relationship of all the galaxies to each other, were it not for advanced computer modeling. So it's a lot of times I think of it in terms of mysticism versus magic. That the mystic seeks to gain some sort of insight about the nature of ultimate reality, whereas the magician is trying to manipulate that reality. And the magician turns to mysticism in order to understand it better, perhaps, but mostly in order to manipulate, mostly in order to apply the will to reality. And that's really kind of how I think about it. It's probably, if I was Catholic, my priest would tell me I was a heretic and probably send me to the pyre. But and I, to the extent that this sort of materialist mysticism of science occurs, I think it's very beautiful. It exposes corners of the universe, even tiny little corners within us, that are just absolutely extraordinary. And to me, the world that it reveals the hand of a creator much more so than the more random processes. But that world it reveals is very much obscured or overshadowed the many worlds, the many visions of the world beyond that religion hands down to us, the symbols that direct us towards a super material or supernatural realm, that largely science in the modern era has come to just simply replace that. And so that knowledge came with a tremendous cost. And then to the extent that we're just specifically to genome sequencing, to the extent we're sequencing genomes in order to better manipulate the genome and create new types of organisms, and this is done on the regular in biofoundries, new types of organisms put in the food and the soil and the air, and so on and so forth, or entirely new animals, or maybe the better way of putting it, to create very different versions or subspecies of animals, which, people, they're working towards that right now, and then turning it in on us, creating very different types of people. I think we're definitely playing with fire, but since the first cavemen, I guess we've always been playing with fire. So,
yeah, no, it's interesting because, one, there's a few thoughts on what you just said that remind me of a few different things. Number one, I think that the government, whoever's pulling the strings, is trying to replace God with science. Science is the new God. And I think we saw that over the whole COVID thing that we were going through. I mean, I was speaking out from the beginning, and I took so much heat. I got shadow banned, all this stuff on the internet. And but I was reading the models initially when it first came out. There was one out of Oxford that was very, very accurate at the time. And actually, Ron DeSantis actually hired a couple of those people to be on his consulting team in Florida after a little while. But then you had the Ferguson at Imperial that was putting out there were going to be 2 million deaths. His modeling actually had a lot less people getting COVID, but it had a lot more people dying, higher mortality rate. And but as it was going, they were suggesting that the assumptions in these models were actually science and factual. The assumptions were factual, especially because they were just posting on the headlines in the news the assumptions of the worst case scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Again, this was the point I made at the opening of the stream, that modern cosmology, transhumanism, all these sort of highfalutin mythologies that are couched in the rhetoric of science really are abstract ideas that are built upon consensus reality and unproven empirical facts, which is again the modeling that he's highlighting about the COOF. These are presented as factual statements, and yet they are abstract models that have yet to be proven. And yet we're told this is science. This is actually the opposite of the scientific method and what we would understand as empirical knowledge.
And it was being proclaimed as science. Trust science. If you don't trust science, you're an idiot. Trust science. Like, well, wait a second. This science is based on assumptions. This is not like science as in this is what it is. This is a moving type of science. There's different types of science, of course. So when I saw that, and then I saw the whole mask debacle, then I saw the whole close everything down, flatten the curve. It was all BS. And if people were being honest about it, if scientists could be honest about it, they would have said that. But if they did speak out against what was going on, you got canceled. You got called names. I mean, you saw what was happening between the head of the NIH, Francis Collins, and Fauci, when they were going back and forth on these three really brilliant scientists. They were that were like Harvard educated, Stanford epidemiologists, and they were just demonizing them.
Bhattacharya, Koldorf, and the woman. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry, Gupta, I think.
Yeah,
anyway.
I think Gupta was out of Oxford.
It was Gupta.
Yes,
that's her name. Yes,
that was who was running that.
Gupta?
Yes, that was who was running the initial models in Oxford. And at the time, by the way, this is March of 2020. They had a 0.023 fatality rate, way before it was popular. People even nowadays, I don't think they know that that's how low it was. Probably even a little lower.
Yeah.
But you look at how the establishment science took over. All of a sudden, science became consensus.
Yeah.
And there's a whole debate on that. They're saying consensus or science is consensus. Like, no, it's not. Science is not consensus. That's not my understanding of science. And science, you're always asking questions, and you're not going to be demonized for asking questions. And when you're right, you have a hypothesis that gets proven true, it should be acknowledged. But they spent months. A lot of times we'd discover something, and before the mainstream media or the science establishment acknowledged it, was 6 months, 12 months later. In the meantime, people like me were being demonized for even suggesting or showing what they were hiding.
It's astounding. You see it in a lot of different areas of science too. Obviously, with climate change, I'm actually very much pro-environmentalist, and I think that human beings should do everything possible to restrain our impact on the environment and allow ecosystems to flourish as best as possible alongside us. But, and I'm honestly, and people hit me on this all the time, I'm not convinced that that human caused global warming isn't happening. I just simply don't know. I'm just totally agnostic on it, mainly because of the politicization of it and that their models, the idea that.
Well, if it was happening, though, water levels would have risen. Venice would be underwater. Al Gore promised by 2010 that Manhattan was going to be underwater. That 2020, the eastern coast were going to be underwater. And I always like to point out, and I've heard Trump say this, and I've heard Dan Pena, man, it isn't mentioned much on this channel, also make this point that if the investment banks, the people who control money in the world, really believe that an investment would be underwater within the next 20 to 50 years, why would they fund millions, if not billions of dollars around the world to build oceanfront property, oceanfront hotels? This is where Donald Trump, I forget what I saw as a clip, maybe somebody was quoting something he said, but he was saying into the effect, if it was really happening, if climate change was really happening, why would they give me, millions and millions of dollars to build oceanfront hotels? Doesn't make any sense, because they would lose their return on investment and they wouldn't be able to pay them back. Obviously, the people who control our finances do not believe that global climate change and global warming is a major threat to future investments.
Their models will be able to predict the weather. some 20 to 100 years hence. I just find it ridiculous
when they get the temperature wrong every day.
Yeah, and so, but I get the concept, and I again, I think that I just think that in general it distracts from what is really important. That habitat preservation, species preservation, and the elimination as much as possible of pollution. That should be the main focus. And anyway, but you see it in climate change or climatology. You see it in anthropology, in physical anthropology, and other related elements. One of the less offensive un-PC takes from the world of biology is that men with XY chromosomes are significantly different than women with XX chromosomes, and there are a lot of other implications to behavioral genetics and cognitive psychology that are pretty well established and completely forbidden to be discussed without being destroyed. And that's a long-standing kind of tyranny of the science, and lots and lots and lots of other things. So, and I would say,
no, and this is a great point. If you didn't catch my recent stream on climate change or the God of climate change, I made this exact point: is that if you actually look at the whole climate freezing, like the global freezing pandemic of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I highlighted that if you go to any official timeline of global climate change, it's totally absent. Where I showed the documents of the U.S. federal government, mainstream outlets, New York Times, all talking about how the Great Freeze was approaching. And then in the late 80s and into the early 90s, they shifted to global warming. And then in the late 2010s, they've shifted it to climate change in general. And I showed in that stream that the glaciers at the poles are actually expanding, which totally nullifies the idea that the planet is warming.
Say that in general, like scientific materialism is forms a kind of soft tyranny within the sciences, so that some of the wackier, more crackpotish researchers who are into parapsychology or any other scientific pursuit that allows for non-materialistic causation to look for causes that may be coming from outside of the system, that's just laughed away. Like creationists and all of that, or intelligent design, that's all just laughed away. Now, I also think that evolutionary theory, as the kind of standard or dogmatic evolutionary theory, neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory, just basically looking at mutation, natural selection, the various ecological relationships, that is a much more coherent and convincing narrative with much, much more evidence behind it than anything that the intelligent design guys have done. But one of the reasons for that,
I totally disagree with him on this point. This is what I said. I don't know if he's just saying that it's convincing to the average Joe, or that those who actually dive into the topic are convinced comparison to the intelligent design people, because he just pointed out that from his perspective, he thinks that science is revealing the hand of a creator. So I would assume that he's not saying that intelligent design people are wrong, because it sounds like he's already given lip service to that being his general orientation and worldview. But I would argue that some of the intelligent design scientists that are deep in this topic have brought up major flaws in the science per se, and have given further credence to the theory of intelligent design. I just want to highlight, we had a super chat come in, and a major shout out to Nectarios. He throws in a generous $20 super chat over on Dono Chat and says, "Thanks for all the content. God bless you. And Christ is in our midst. He is and ever shall be." Thank you very much, Nectarios. And I just want to remind people, if you're enjoying this stream and you'd like to support my work, my YouTube channel, feel free to send in a question or comment or a donation of support on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or here on YouTube. And if you're really feeling generous, feel free to give some COTEL Crew memberships. I know the chat always appreciates it.
I'm not saying who's right or wrong, but one of the reasons for that is because if you say you're an evolutionary biologist or a biologist who is an intelligent design theorist, you're going to get zero funding, and
Sure.
everyone, you get zero respect. And so that consensus just forms a barrier between any of the wild ideas that might actually shake up the paradigm. And like one of the most amazing is Alfred Wegener, the geologist who proposed what we now call plate tectonics. And it was as late, I believe this was in the 60s. And they still weren't sure, is the Earth kind of expanding to do that? Is the Earth contracting, to spread the continents apart? Is it contracting to create the mountains? What's going on? Is it the sun? All these different theories. And his theory was that the continents sit on tectonic plates that are shifting, and he was ridiculed. Huh. He was early on it, but it was in the 60s that they accepted it, and he didn't get to enjoy it. He was a crackpot the entire time. Now I'm sure other geologists had all sorts of really even wackier theories that involved leviathans under the the Earth's crust or whatever. And I'm not saying you should take them seriously, but I do think that the dissident voice is essential in science. And yeah, we saw it in the pandemic. You see it all over the place.
Well, what got me was, for instance, the natural immunity thing.
Yeah.
There was
Yeah, so clearly he's saying that the general scientific consensus makes it difficult for intelligent design proponents to advance their thesis within the contemporary period. Major thank you to Justin Henley, who just gifted 2 COTEL Crew memberships. Welcome, Erast Aaron and Bitter Klinger. Give a thank you to Justin Henley for gifting you guys a COTEL Crew membership. Enjoy all your emojis, and thank you very much, Justin, for your support.
There was a study out of Israel that showed natural immunity was 26 or 27 times more effective than the vaccine. It was a great study. There was a number of other studies that eventually came up in a meta-analysis showing that. But if you were to post that anywhere or talk about it, they would immediately take it down, or they would immediately shadow ban it. That's one of the things that got me shadow banned, because I was pushing that hard. I'm like, look, why can't we acknowledge natural immunity? What is the problem here? I mean, it's been this way forever, and it's been acknowledged for just because now we have COVID, all of a sudden natural immunity is not going to be a thing. But that's the narrative that they push, because they want to push their vaccines. That was the goal. They wanted to make their hundreds of billions of dollars and get everybody, which is a gene therapy, by the way. They don't like to acknowledge that, but I mean that's what we're talking about. At least the mRNA one is a gene therapy, and so it just showed me a lot as to where we are with society, and that there seems to be another plan that we're not in on.
Sure,
but we see it in almost everything they're doing right now.
That plan, that big plan. I'm also fairly agnostic on where to locate that plan. The 3 theories that I work with, the one that most people would say it is that simply your mind projecting agency onto a semi-chaotic system, looking for some unifying agent that is moving through it, and your cognitive triggers are always going to push that out there. The second is that there's a cabal of the singular cabal or multiple like small cabals that really do control everything, and they're guiding us towards a one world government, or they're guiding us towards a transhuman future, or they're guiding us to wear I don't know, dresses or whatever. And that is also, that's the one I actually am the least persuaded by. The one that makes more sense to me anyway is that you have a whole lot of little small cabals, most of them in competition with each other, and oftentimes swimming in unison like fish. Because their interests align temporarily here, and then when they don't, then the friction is caused. And so that the system is mostly pockets of order with a lot of chaos to keep it shifting around. And yet there's also a kind of a direction, right? There's a teleology to this. I can't get away from. And if that telos is a cabal, no one has been able to really locate them. People have located a lot of them, right? Is it the lizard people? Is it the Jews? Is it the Masons? Is it the Catholics? Is it the capitalists? Is it the communists? Is it the Satanists? Is it the Christians? So people have been able to locate it, but I've never seen any persuasive evidence that any one of those are even unified within themselves, let alone having a singular cabal at the top. And so the third theory, probably the most ancient, is that there is an intelligence above human intelligence that is either directing or attracting events towards itself. But in a secular society, in a society of reason and rationalism, that hypothesis don't fly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what you're saying is, there's a good and evil.
Yeah.
There's a devil. And
we just want to give a major thank you to Soon Kim. He just donated another $10 super chat and said, about that email I sent you, the girl, 2 weeks later, she is sitting courtside at a Lakers game. All lies, dude. For those of you who want context, Soon Kim sent me an email about a girl he was giving a Uber ride to, and her relationship to the occult and all this different stuff, and looking for help. So Soon, if you want to give more description to that in the live chat, feel free. But thank you very much, brother, for your generous support today. I really appreciate that. And over on Venmo, Bitter Klinger just sent in $10 and said, thanks for the YouTube work. And so thank you very much, Bitter Klinger, for the $10 super chat on Venmo. Really appreciate you.
And I think that's the most logical one for me, because you see, evil in a lot of different places. And you're right, you can't exactly put your finger on it. But when you have all these coincidences happening, it's not a coincidence. They're coinciding for a reason. And, if you take what happened with COVID, I've thought about this a lot. And at first, I mean, March 2020, I was speaking out against things and saying this isn't adding up. So you can imagine then, I don't know what your position was at the time, but I'm talking about
Very much the same.
I was on an island. I felt like I was on an island. Family, friends, they respected where I was coming from. And they know that I'm going to speak out, to speak the truth the best that I can. But they're also like, what do you really, really, this seems really bad. And, it was bad in many ways. But what are the odds where you have, let's call him the most controversial president, at least of our lifetime, maybe ever in U.S. history, maybe, and a virus is released the year of his election?
So I want to skip this section because it really just revolves around conversation about Donald Trump. Both of them are Trump supporters. Ed Clay kind of was an anti-Trumper and then later came convinced. And they're talking about he's sort of the divider in chief and how he's a divisive figure. And Joe Allen talks about how he's kind of a a-hole, but that's kind of celebrated. He enjoys it because he kind of speaks his mind in a world in which conformity is the norm. So I just want to focus on transhumanism because that's about 10 minutes. I just want to skip to the next section where they get back to the transhuman topic.
Did it brought people together more though? Like really put an effort into it, and actually, with his great policy, with his not being a warmonger, as much as he was being attacked, a simple different approach, I forgive you. We're going to bring the country together.
Yeah. That wouldn't be Trump then, right? He would be somebody else. And in fact, most of the people, like his most ardent supporters, when they do criticize him, it's for those sorts of concessions where he's, oftentimes just trying to impress people across the aisle. He could have been, like I say, I would have rather seen someone of a different sort of character. But in the end, that's the character that's the character who played the main role. And in retrospect, as much as at the time it was like, I don't like that. In retrospect, it's fantastic. 2020, I rarely ever vote at all. But it was 2016 that really convinced me that voting actually matters. Maybe the last election in which voting mattered, but it did. And so, come 2020, I flew from Montana back to Tennessee just to cast that one vote, just to, for my own conscience. I wrote an article about it for the Federal.
So this kind of continues. I don't know why these timestamps. This is not about media control, but let me skip forward here to hopefully the next section.
He's a liar,
right?
And then you got 50 former Intel agents and officials, and I think even a director or two signing the statement that the laptop.
Trump is evil. I think they absolutely believe he's the worst person ever. The question is, if the media has the power to attack somebody just because they think that they're evil and do whatever they can, not just the media, let's call it the establishment. What happens when they think you're the same way?
As it's said many times, and I agree with it completely, they're not just coming after him, they're coming after you. This is like what you see happening to Trump, you're next. And maybe not everybody, probably not most people, but there you see with January 6th, they're more than willing to make some examples of anyone who steps up. And you just never know when your number's going to get pulled. And if it does, they can make things very uncomfortable for you if you're around at all.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it constantly. What they're doing to Trump right now, he's got
human psychology for those who see it coming. But one part of that is the section is called "Find People on Both Sides," and it's a comparison of the way in which Yuval Noah Harari is experienced and treated by the populist right, and Trump has been by the establishment. And the example I use, you remember the Find People hoax, and they took a snippet, but they refused to play the rest of it, where he's like, you have to find people on both sides, but I'm not talking about the white nationalists, them I condemn completely. But they only played the part to find people on both sides. And they just did that over and over and over again. So it's drilled into your head. And it's like, to the point that if anybody even found out about the rest, they didn't care. And that's one of the ways. It's a very cheap trick. It's kind of like a cheap deep fake. Because it's not fake, but it is fake. You take that snippet somewhat out of context and it's going to hit hard. And even if they see the rest of the context, that emotional impact has been had. And you're going to be able to drive all sorts of either political agendas or economic agendas or even religious agendas on the basis of it. Now with Harari, he had the surveillance under skin hoax. Where the entire culture around the vaccines contain advanced technologies beyond which anyone is aware of outside of this strange fringe, and there was that one snippet. It just infuriated me because I spent a lot of time reading Harari, criticizing Harari, especially his atheistic points of view and his views on free will, which he believes is not a thing. But then, you know, it's to spend so much time understanding this dude, and all of a sudden, you know, you got these guys coming out from the fringe and is like, you see, Harari's talking about the vaccines when he says that surveillance is going under the skin. That was the famous interview or roundtable with the Athens Democracy Forum, and he's talking about. They asked him what will we remember COVID for, and he said, you know, COVID will be remembered as the period when everything went digital, and COVID will be remembered for the era when surveillance goes under the skin. And they took that and, you know, put a bunch of other Vaxbot stuff to it, right? The intra-body nano networks, you know, and look at the patents, just look at the patents. And it was so strange because if you just listened, I mean, they obviously either only listened to that, which I doubt, but they knew the rest of what he was saying, and they're just intentionally lying, just like the mainstream media does. Because what he went on to say is that with the system that's being put in place, justified by COVID policies, you are setting yourself up for a digital dictatorship, and that the Stalins of the future will not need KGB agents to follow everyone around. They will have biosensors everywhere. They'll have algorithms that can interpret those biosensors, and surveillance will have gone under the skin. And it's a bad thing, right? And the thing that is really curious to me, for those who did actually watch the entire talk, other than being able to boost your numbers with a sensationalist meme, what purpose is served by keeping people from thinking about what he was actually saying? It's a dark eon indeed.
Yeah, I think, you know, what you're talking about, people hear these days what they want to hear.
Yeah.
And they get the clips and they share the clips of what they want to hear. I think what we saw in COVID, at least for me, people would repost things based on headlines. If you read the article that the headline was on, and the article would say something a little different than the headline. And then if you clicked on the study that the article was writing about, the study would say something completely different.
Yeah.
And that kind of sums up where we're at these days. Headlines are what cause people to act and do and see. You know, the algorithm is so based on these headlines getting shared and the confirmation bias that gives people to make them right. And that's where we're at. I'm right, you're wrong. You know, that's where we're at in society. And you know, how many relationships can you keep by making everybody around you wrong?
Yeah.
And
okay, I'm going to skip forward to the very end because the rest of the conversation is about kind of these mad prophets that he talks about. Again, Harari and Kurzweil, and then talks about deep fakes and Biden and whether Biden was real, and kind of hysteria, conspiracy theories over deep fakes, which he highlights that even people that are Trump supporters during the trials believe that maybe he was already dead and claimed that an interview he did was already a deep fake. So we've kind of hit all that stuff. So I'm going to go to the very end where he kind of closes on his book, and we'll listen to that and then wrap up the stream. So again, thank you all for being here. Smash that like. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to send them in, and I will certainly address those before we end the stream.
in every way, because it freaked me out so bad, and what he was saying. And so yeah, I'll send it to you though. It's pretty free. I don't even know what to think about it. Like, what does it mean if that specific video? I don't think that, you know, I'm not like President Biden's not a person, nothing like that. And I'm still not convinced.
Well, you know what? In 5 years, we should reconvene on this very topic and see if we have any idea what's real.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder.
Yeah.
A lot of technologies, a lot of overpromising with technologies. Deep fakes that's been a thing for a long time.
Yeah.
And the threat of the deep fake has been a thing for a long time. But man, the ones that I've seen that are like goofball deep fakes, they're getting better and better, and those are cheap, right?
Yeah.
That's cheap software.
No telling what the CIA or NSA or anybody like that has,
Yeah.
You know, to do. In closing, what would you want people to learn from your book or understand? Or what questions would you want people to have when they get done reading your book?
The question should be, where do I go now? What do I do? That's supposed to be what you answer at the end of the book, which I do give, by the way. I give a totally eugenicized cultural genome for the reader at the end. Eugenicized my preference. And if they want their minds and behaviors to be eugenicized by my mimetic strain, then knock yourself out. But you know, this is going to work for you. But you know, the book is it is about this period of rapid technological development and reckless deployment, you know, radical adoption, and the philosophies underpinning them. And what I really tried to bring out of it is the spiritual and religious elements, some of which are openly declared. The declaration that we are creating gods via algorithms. Some of it being more observation. A good example would be a very old one, Fritz Lang's 1927 film Metropolis, the satanic fembot. It's so that just the way in which people view this technological surge that we're experiencing and will experience more. So I just want people to understand the gravity of the situation, and I want people to understand the depth of the spiritual crisis we're in. But I don't, I think a lot of people are freaked out, right? They're freaked out by my reporting at the War Room. I've been meeting a lot of people. I'm on this book tour. I meet a lot of people. And one thing that I get a lot is like, man, this just scares me to death. And like, when I first started watching you on the War Room, I had to turn it off because it was just freaking me out. And that's actually the last thing I want people to do. I want people to be desensitized to the weirdness to some extent. Not so much that you would accept it, but so much that enough that you're actually able to think it through. So maybe, think of it in terms of, I want you to be able to walk out into the snow barefoot, but I don't want people to be so numb that they get hypothermia.
Sure. That's awesome. Well,
and so this was kind of an overview of the conversation with Joe Allen and his book, The Dark Aeon. Again, this is the book cover. I always take the book covers off. I have a whole trash can over here full of book covers. But it kind of wraps up our conversation on transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and technocracy. Again, themes that you've heard me ramble on multiple times. And I just want to thank everybody again for being here. We had a super chat come in from Harry Serpanos, throws in $3 and says, sentient AI is BS. Absolutely. As a productivity tool, it's great. True. But the demonic misuse of integrating it with biology and, quote, overriding, unquote, our souls function is evil. Yes, it is. The man machine as an ancient desire for immortality is pure Luciferianism. That's absolutely the case. And then Harry just sent in another one. Let me pull that one up. And he says, oh, actually, that's the wrong one. That was the one we just read. Anyways, I'll play his. He just sent another $3. He says, in the medieval warm period, the Vikings grew plants in Greenland, and it was much warmer than now. Science is never settled, and climate science is nearly impossible to do because our environment and nature are too complex to model. Absolutely true. So thank you very much, Harry, for the $6 support. Really appreciate you, brother, and all the support you've given over the years. And I support everybody else. Thank you, Abject Fool, for your generous super chat. Thank you, Sung Kim, for your generous support today. Thank you, Justin Henley, for gifting some memberships. Thank you, Nectarios. And thank you, Bitter Klinger, for your support. That's going to do my stream today. Now, I was going to potentially post a video tomorrow on my reaction to Trump and Joe Rogan and some of that stuff. I suspect it'll only be like a 10-minute video, something short, just because it's such a hot topic right now. And then I got some streams lined up for this week. One is listening to an Orthodox priest, a Russian Orthodox priest, talking about the evils of Islam. That's going to be coming this week. And we'll be looking at a in-depth video on the trans agenda and the devil's trick is the way that I framed that one. So those two will be this week. And then I'll be doing Russia before the second coming. That's a sponsored stream. And right before the election next week, I'll be hosting an open panel, probably on November 3rd, on what people's thoughts on the election are going to be. I think that should be a very hot topic. Everybody's going to be excited to kind of share their perspective on the election and everything that's going to occur. So all that stuff you can expect in the next week and a half. And so I just want to thank you all again for the support, and I will see you in the next one. As always, until then, God bless.